Hey guys! Tonight we're going to climb up into the ancient highlands of East Africa, where the sky is thin, the air smells like coffee berries and dust, and money doesn't jingle in your pocket, it thuds. Because welcome to the kingdom of Aksum, where coins weren't always metal, and some of the most powerful rulers minted currency that was, quite literally, stone. You probably won't survive this economy. You'll get to market, try to buy a bundle of incense or a goat, and realize your wallet weighs about as much as the goat. It's going to be slow, slightly ridiculous, and yes, people really did this for centuries. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time in the comments. Let's see how far and wide this caravan of sleepy travelers stretches tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start your walk through the kingdom just as dawn breaks across the Ethiopian plateau. The light here isn't subtle. It bleeds across the red-brown hills like someone cracked open a pomegranate too close to the horizon. You're high, nearly 2,000 meters above sea level, and everything around you feels dry and stretched, like it's been basking under the sun for centuries. This is Aksum. At its peak around the 4th century CE, it was one of the great empires of the ancient world. Rome knew it, Byzantium respected it, Persia negotiated with it, and India traded spices with it, even if they couldn't quite pronounce the king's name. You tread down a dusty path flanked by tall stone obelisks, some standing proud, others toppled like sleeping giants. These are stelae, markers of ancient tombs and power. The tallest would have once been 9 stories high, all carved, all dragged upright without modern tools. The sound of your feet brushing the ground seems small beneath them. That's okay. This place was made to feel big. You pass a group of shepherds guiding sheep across a slope, their voices soft and rhythmic. The hills are dotted with dry fig trees and crumbling walls, remnants of a time when this region pulsed with markets, coins, temples, and taxes. And about those coins, they didn't always glitter. Some of them were dull, heavy, and about as sleek as a paving stone. But they worked, somehow, sometimes. Your first encounter with one is less than glamorous. You're trying to buy a dried fish at a roadside stall, and the merchant holds up a small, squarish object. It's grayish, flat, feels like slate. He flips it, showing a carved symbol that looks like a stylized ear of wheat. Then he grunts, waiting. You realize this is money. And not the backup money. Not something you'd find in a tomb as a symbolic offering. This was used, touched, counted. At least, that's what some historians say. Others still argue whether Aksum's stone coins were a kind of proto-currency used for specific rituals or reserve stores of value. Were they minted like coins? Yes. Were they circulated like coins? Mostly. Did people always accept them? Depends on who you ask, and whether they were desperate enough for a handful of barley that day. What we know is this: Aksum was sophisticated. It minted coins in gold, silver, copper, and yes, stone. It conducted international trade across 2 seas. It had written language, first in Sabaean script, then in Ge'ez, an ancestor of modern Ethiopian liturgy. It had kings who carved their names into granite and, occasionally, into the back of your wallet in the form of a very heavy coin. You hike a little higher, and the view spreads out. The city of Aksum at its peak would have bustled with trade caravans from Sudan, merchants from Arabia, spices from India, and oxen wearing bells made from bronze. The markets sold ivory, incense, slaves, textiles, and even rhinoceros hides. And somewhere in this marketplace of goods and gossip, a man would open his satchel, and instead of shiny coins, He'd pull out a palm-sized slab of rock with a king's face etched into it. It sounds absurd until you remember. It's not the material that makes something valuable. It's belief. And Aksum believed. They believed in the weight of memory, in symbols carved deep, in stones that didn't just sit heavy in the hand but carried the scent of salt, incense, and camel sweat. Because most of these coins weren't local. They were travelers. They crossed seas, passed between ports, ended up in Alexandria, or maybe beneath the floorboards of a monsoon-wrecked house on the Arabian coast. The sun climbs higher now. You find shade near a collapsed stone tablet, its surface smooth except for the ancient script running along its edge. It tells the story of a ruler who brought back tribute from the Nile and carved a monument so the gods wouldn't forget. Nearby, a boy is skipping flat pieces of stone across a pond. You try not to think of how many ancient coins might be at the bottom. But don't worry, we'll get to that later. For now, just breathe in this strange, dry air. Let your body rest under the open sky. And remember that once, in a land without ATMs or Bitcoin, people carved their wealth into rocks, and it worked well enough to build an empire the Romans couldn't stop talking about. The sun's up now, soft but insistent, crawling like golden syrup across the hills and courtyards of Aksum. You stretch your legs and look around, trying to orient yourself. So, where exactly are you? Aksum isn't just ancient, it's also a little geographically confusing, especially if your mental map of Africa is still based on old-school posters and not, say, reality. Let's get our bearings. You're in the northern highlands of modern-day Ethiopia, a region once so rich in echoes that its very dust seems to hum when you walk across it. Think plateaus, basalt cliffs, acacia trees bent just slightly by wind and time. Now add in the fact that you're not far from the coast, just a few days' hard journey downhill and east to the Red Sea. Not exactly beachfront, but close enough to matter. And that's part of the story. Aksum didn't build its empire in the middle of nowhere. It chose a spot on a natural crossroads, between the African interior and the Arabian Peninsula, between Nile Valley cultures and the trade winds that blew merchants across the Indian Ocean. In other words, it was kind of the geographic jackpot. Elevated enough to avoid the worst of the tropical disease zones, close enough to the sea to trade, remote enough to defend, and just lofty enough to build a capital city with a divine view of everything you were taxing. Historians still debate the actual reach of the Aksumite Empire. Some maps draw it modestly, just northern Ethiopia and Eritrea. Others stretch it wide, down the Red Sea coast into present-day Sudan and up across the Bab el-Mandeb Strait into southern Arabia. It likely fluctuated, like most empires, breathing in and out with every ruler and rebellion. But no one disagrees that it was big enough. Big enough that a Roman traveler wrote home describing the kingdom as third among the world's great powers, after Rome and Persia. Big enough that it minted coins used across multiple continents. Big enough that even when its borders shrank, its reputation stayed oversized, like a once famous actor who still gets seated at the best table. You leave the courtyard and start winding your way down a slope lined with low stone houses, their walls patched with mud and their doors hung with dyed goat hide. The city isn't huge, but it feels dense, every alley buzzing with trade, prayer, gossip, and goats who do not care that you're in their way. Somewhere, a bell rings, not a church bell, not yet. That'll come later. For now, it's probably a trader announcing the arrival of salt slabs or barley bundles from the Tigray lowlands. And here's where it gets interesting. Because before the carved coins and minted metals, Aksum's currency was mobile, literally. Salt, camels, cloth, beads, things you could eat, wear, or ride. Things that were valuable not because they bore a king's face, but because they did something. You walk into a small market square, where baskets of frankincense and myrrh sit in dusty rows. One merchant is weighing his product not with scales, but by comparing bundles against a standard-sized stone disc, not a coin, but close. You realize you're watching pre-coin economy at work. Trust, habit, and a whole lot of squinting. Coins didn't arrive in Aksum overnight. Like everything else here, they came through exchange. Aksum had been part of the Sabaean world, sharing religious ideas, architectural styles, and trade protocols with the people across the Red Sea in what is now Yemen. And it was from there that Aksum inherited the earliest idea that a ruler's face could be currency. But before coins, it was the camel that ruled. Caravans moved goods, ivory, tortoiseshell, live animals, across dry plateaus, through salty depressions, and down to the Red Sea ports. From there, they'd catch ships heading to Rome, India, or Arabia. And in return, Aksum took in glass, wine, silk, and, eventually, a very shiny new idea. Money that talked. Well, not literally. That would be too exciting. But money that symbolized, that represented royal authority, divine favor, and, sometimes, the king's very cheekbones. Money that stayed valuable even when you left the goat market and went all the way to the next city. A miracle. Still, there was an awkward phase. You pass an elderly woman seated near a pottery stall, chewing cot and humming tunelessly. Beside her, half buried in the dirt, is a flat piece of stone etched faintly with a cross and some letters. You blink. Could be part of a pillar. Could be a roof tile. Could be a coin. That's the thing. No one agrees where the coin line actually is. Some scholars argue that Aksum's earliest coins were just standardized trade weights, not meant to exchange hands directly. Others insist they were ceremonial, used for offerings, not purchases. And a third group nods sagely and says, it depends. You brush the dust off the stone with your sandal. It's heavier than you expected. It feels like money. Sort of. Later, in the shade of a tall fig tree, a merchant pulls out his collection. He's not rich, not a priest or scribe, just someone who, over decades, found odd stones in odd places. A few have faces. One has an ear of wheat. Several are so worn they just look like river pebbles with ambitions. Used to pay the temple tax, he says, squinting. Or maybe the barley fee. I forget. You don't press. The history here doesn't live in books, it's breathed. Half remembered. Whispered down through granaries and goat paths. And so, as you rest beneath the fig branches and listen to the faint hum of distant drums and cooking fires, you start to get it. Aksum didn't just sit on a map. It perched between worlds, practical and symbolic, trade and tribute, stone and shimmer. Its coinage reflected that. Sometimes useful, sometimes mysterious, always a little heavier than expected. And somewhere in all this weight, in these mountains and misremembered symbols, was an empire quietly shaping how value itself could be seen. You wake to the sound of bells, not melodic ones, but the flat, clunky clang of metal tapping against camel necks. They're close. Very close. You roll over onto your elbows, peer between two acacia trees, and there they are. A caravan. Not a dramatic one. No royal banners or dancing musicians. Just a long, sun-bleached procession of camels plodding up the slope, each loaded with bundles of salt, skins, or something wrapped in layers of palm fiber and secrecy. The lead handler, barefoot, dusty, humming a tune that seems half lullaby, half complaint, spots you and gives the world's most casual nod, the kind that says, "Yes, I've walked 100 miles. No, I don't need your commentary." This is how Aksum's economy moved, on legs. Long, knobby, faintly grumpy legs. Before coins were common, and even alongside them, Aksum thrived on transportable value. Salt slabs, gold nuggets, Ostrich feathers, spices, sometimes even slaves, though we'll handle that part of the story gently when we get there. You walk alongside the caravan for a while, listening to the rhythmic creak of leather straps, the thump of hooves in dust. Each camel carries something the empire needs, and something someone else will want. This isn't just local trade. These goods are in motion, part of a network that will eventually feed Roman wine cellars, Persian inkpots, Indian incense burners, and maybe, if you're lucky, a poet's metaphor. And yes, this is where camels become the Bitcoin of their age. Because just like modern cryptocurrency, these animals and their cargo could represent value even before anything was exchanged. Salt wasn't just seasoning, it was currency. It was issued, carried, counted, taxed. If you had salt, you could get things. If you had a camel carrying salt, you had credit. Historians still argue whether salt slabs were formally standardized in Aksum or just casually accepted as a matter of shared habit. Some records suggest specific sizes, brick-like chunks chipped to fit wooden frames. Others hint at regional differences. But the fact remains. A well-shaped slab of salt could buy you food, shelter, or a set of earrings that probably still smell faintly of goat. You pause at a roadside exchange point, not quite a market, not quite a rest stop. A shaded awning, some mats, a low platform for measuring goods. Here, the camels kneel and the trade begins. The handler unwraps a bundle of animal hides. The merchant beneath the awning inspects it, nods, and retrieves a small stone disc from a jar. Ah, there it is again. The almost coin. This one is flat, gray, maybe the size of a tangerine. It has some markings, possibly Ge'ez script, or just scratches from being stuffed in a bag with sharp nuts. Either way, it's money-ish. And the exchange is quiet. No bargaining shouts, no dramatic hand-waving. Just a glance, a nod, a swap, because everyone knows what these goods are worth. The value isn't just the object, it's the journey it took to get here. Later, a scholar sipping lukewarm beer under a tamarind tree will tell you, Aksumites didn't believe in idle currency. It had to move, like camels, or gossip. The beer is awful, but the point stands. You continue on foot now, following the caravan down a winding path toward the port of Adulis, Aksum's beating economic heart on the coast. Or, well, near enough to it. The port is hot, sticky, noisy, and completely unbothered by your presence. Here, coins start to feel slightly more at home. Metal ones, gold ones, even. There are merchants from across the Red Sea, Arabs, Persians, Greeks, some wrapped in linen, others in robes of shocking colors. They speak languages that blend and slosh together like spices in a stew. A man with bright silver rings offers you a dried fig and then tries to sell you a used ox. You decline, unsure whether "two sneeze guarantee" is really that reassuring. This is the crossroads where value gets weird. Aksumites are trading animal products, incense, spices, sometimes even wild animals, giraffes, monkeys, exotic birds, often in exchange for precious metals, fine textiles, or finished goods like ceramics. And the payment? It depends. Some want metal coins, gold or silver stamped with Roman or Persian emperors. Others are happy to take bundled goods or stone tokens with carvings that match temple ledgers far away. You watch one transaction involving frankincense and a single smooth black disc, passed reverently from merchant to merchant. No one spends it, no one bites it, it's more symbol than money. A sign of a deal fulfilled, a promise made. Was that a coin? Historians are still scratching their heads. Some argue these items weren't meant to be spent repeatedly, but used as receipts, physical tokens of agreement that were then retired after the trade. Others say they were early forms of localized credit, accepted only in specific cities or guilds. Either way, they had meaning. And if you're trying to build an empire across mountains, rivers, and seas, meaning matters as much as metal. You head back inland, legs aching slightly from the slope. As the sun begins to dip, the camel train is heading the other direction now, loaded with Roman glassware, jars of sesame oil, and bolts of silk no one here quite knows how to wear. The sun paints the hills gold. The shadows stretch. And as you walk alongside these creatures, who don't know they're economic revolutionaries, you start to see it clearly. Before the mint, before the stamp, before the face of a king on a coin, there was the rhythm of trade, the weight of salt, the soft crunch of stone pressed into a palm, the long, slow footsteps of value being carried, across deserts, through markets, into memory. You wake the next morning in the port town of Adulis. Well, not in it, exactly, but close enough to smell the spices wafting from its warehouses and the sea brine clinging to every plank of its warped wooden piers. The gulls are already squabbling overhead, and someone nearby is arguing, loudly and with great flair, about the price of sesame oil, which, apparently, is always too high this time of year. This isn't just noise. It's money moving. Adulis was the gateway to Aksum's economy, its most important Red Sea port and a trading hub that pulled in goods and gossip from every direction. If Aksum was the brain of the empire, this was the mouth, busy, loud, and always tasting something new. Frankincense from the south, silk from the east, wine from the west, and gold. Well, gold from anywhere they could find it. You lean against a sun-warmed wall and watch the traffic. Sailors from India unloading crates. A Roman merchant squinting at a local tax clerk. A pile of tortoiseshell being haggled over with an urgency usually reserved for life-saving medicine. And woven through all of it, coins. Some are metal, some are stone, some are just clay tablets with scribbled symbols and hopeful energy. You follow a trader as he hauls a crate into the customs office, a long stone building with an awning that flaps in the sea breeze like it's trying to get your attention. Inside, the air is stuffy. The walls are lined with reed baskets filled with dusty scrolls, and a clerk with ink-stained fingers is adjusting a scale carved from horn and copper. This is where Aksum did something very clever. Instead of taxing people at the source or relying on distant governors to scrape off their share, with or without creative interpretation, Aksum simply taxed the crossroads. And it worked. The Red Sea tax trap. If you were a merchant traveling between Egypt and India, say, bringing Egyptian linen east and returning with pepper or cinnamon, you could either sail directly across the open sea and risk being eaten by a storm, or you could stop at Adulis, unload your goods, walk them overland through Aksumite territory, then load them again on another ship and finish the trip. Guess which option most people chose? Yup, the overland route. Because it was safer, more predictable, and, here's the secret, Aksum made it feel worth it. The roads were protected, the storage was decent, the markets were good, and the taxes, while annoying, were fair-ish, or at least no worse than what you'd face elsewhere. Historians still argue how formal the tax system was, whether it operated with receipts and official seals or whether it leaned heavily on the honor system and someone's very persuasive cousin named Tesfaye. But what's clear is that Adulis became a kind of economic bottleneck, and Aksum held the stopper. You peek into a side room, where a junior scribe is carefully carving a tally into a clay tablet. It shows a shipment of peppercorns, dozens of sacks, and a note about stone token accepted for partial tax relief. There it is again, a stone coin, standing in for metal. Maybe just for this shipment, maybe just for this office. But it counted. Later, you're shown one of these tax coins. It's rectangular, about the size of a playing card, and carved with a simple image, possibly a cross, possibly a trident, possibly a stylized garlic clove. The iconography department was clearly understaffed that day. The clerk tells you it's from the reign of King Uzanas. Issued for merchants who paid port duties in livestock instead of currency, he explains. This let them claim credit on return trips. So now we've got deferred payment, multi-material taxes, and a customs office running on goat receipts. Aksum, you're starting to see, wasn't just improvising. It was innovating. And the more trade flowed, the more the empire realized something vital. The real value of currency wasn't in its shininess, it was in its flexibility. Its ability to travel, adapt, and mean different things in different hands. You head out to the wharf again. The sun is higher now, casting a warm glare across the sea. A group of sailors sits in a circle, sipping from a clay jug and passing around what looks like a stone disc with a hole in the middle. You ask. They laugh. It's lucky, one says. Came from a merchant in Adulis. Told me it would keep my ship from tipping. Superstition or currency? The line blurs. One sailor insists it's a real coin. Another says it's ceremonial, offered at a temple before a long voyage. A third shrugs and says, it keeps the children quiet when they play with it, so I don't care. Back on land, in a shaded corner of the market, a priest is accepting donations. Not in money, but in goods. Salt, dried fruit, a single strip of ivory. But when one woman drops a carved stone token into the bowl, the priest nods like he knows exactly what it is. A record of value, a symbol of promise, a receipt, a prayer, or both. You lean back, watching the whole machine hum. The carts coming in, the ships setting sail, the taxes being scribbled down with charcoal and hope. Somewhere in the distance, a camel sneezes, and a clerk drops his scale. And in the middle of it all? A coin you could stub your toe on. It shouldn't have worked. But it did. Because Aksum didn't just run on metal. It ran on motion. On people who believed that a stone marked with the right image, carried the right distance, and handed to the right person, could be as powerful as gold. You're sitting in the shade of a sycamore tree, swatting lazily at a fly that seems far too invested in your ears, when someone places something cool and oddly smooth into your palm. It's not food. It's not a tool. It's a coin. Well, sort of. It's a small, flat disc, stone, definitely, but worked into such a perfect oval that it feels manufactured. The surface is faintly pitted, like it's been handled, dropped, touched again. One side bears a cross. The other, a face. Vague, stylized, stern. The merchant who handed it to you shrugs. Still good, he says. It spent 2 years in a temple basin. Blessed and balanced. You ask him if it's money. He says, depends what you want to buy. And just like that, your day gets more complicated. See, Aksum's use of stone coins wasn't a primitive accident or a poor kingdom playing dress-up with rocks. It was a deliberate system, layered, flexible, slightly confusing, and perfectly logical, if you were born into it. To our modern brain, money equals metal, preferably shiny, ideally government-issued with lasers and fraud protection and commemorative dog breeds. But in ancient Aksum, value could be assigned to stone, so long as it was marked, recognized, and, this part's key, believed in. Historians still argue whether Aksum's stone coins functioned purely as symbolic placeholders, or if they genuinely circulated alongside gold, silver, and copper currency. Some believe they were emergency tokens used during shortages. Others think they were localized instruments, used in temples, among rural communities, or for transactions where precious metal would have been overkill. And let's be real. Who wants to pay for 2 fish and a clay cup of barley beer with a gold coin? Not even emperors are that flashy. You spend the rest of the afternoon peering into market stalls, half pretending to shop, mostly watching what gets passed between hands. You spot a metal coin used to pay a tax clerk, a stone disc exchanged for a small carving of a lion, a bundle of salt that includes both types of coins, plus something that might be a charm or just a very confident beetle. It's messy, but it works. You pause by a young boy playing with his father's coin pouch. He's stacking round tokens into towers, then knocking them over. Some are metal, some are stone. One has a hole drilled through it, worn smooth from being carried on a string, possibly as a kind of portable currency necklace. The boy's father catches your eye. He'll learn, he says. First you touch the weight, then you learn the worth. And that's really it, because stone coins were heavy. Sometimes absurdly so. Some weighed as much as a small mango. Others were flatter, closer to modern metal tokens, but still thick enough to chip a tooth. That weight wasn't just a nuisance, it was a feature. A reminder that wealth had substance. That power was supposed to be carried, not flashed. You stop at a local shrine on your way back toward the town's edge. A woman is laying offerings at the base of a stela, flowers, dried lentils, and one smooth stone coin, placed carefully like a kiss. You watch her close her eyes, murmur a word you don't catch, and leave without a backward glance. Was it a payment? A prayer? In Aksum, it could be both. A nearby elder sees you lingering and chuckles. We used to say the stone coins held things, he says. Not money, things, hopes, names, memories. He lets you hold another. This one's pale gray, ringed with a pattern like olive branches. It belonged to my grandfather, he says. He traded it for a wife. She traded it for land. Now I keep it in my pocket, just in case. In case of what? He doesn't say. And it's not just the physicality that's interesting, it's the iconography. Even in stone, Aksumite coins carried imagery. Ears of grain, crosses, stars, abstract lines that probably meant something very specific to someone 1,000 years ago and now look vaguely like a doodle of a ladder. Some coins bore royal faces, though usually so stylized you're not sure if you're looking at a king or just a particularly serious potato. Others had religious symbols, first pagan, then increasingly Christian as the kingdom converted under King Hosanna. You hear whispers that some stone coins were only used in churches, not for buying, but for marking donations or penance. One theory suggests that penitent donors would be issued a coin when they gave a gift to the church, proof of their generosity. A receipt for heaven, someone calls it. Was it symbolic? Functional? Faith-based accounting? Yes. Maybe all of them. And here's the clever bit. Because stone could be carved locally, these coins didn't always have to travel far. In remote areas, they were cheap to produce, easy to mark, hard to fake, unless you were very into geology, and durable. And because they weren't tempting to melt down or hoard, they circulated. You end your day watching an elder teach a group of children how to recognize counterfeits, not of gold, but of stone. One child holds up a coin made of softer shale. Another tests it by tapping it against a jar. If it rings like a bowl, the elder says, it lies. There's a rhythm to it. A knowledge passed hand to hand, not written down. The weight, the texture, the story told by the scratches. You're holding one now. It's not valuable by modern standards. It wouldn't buy you a sandwich. But in this moment, in this fading golden light, it feels like a secret. Like something meant to last. Or be lost. Or found again when someone needs it most. A stone. A coin. A story pressed into time. You've wandered the stele fields. Watched coins passed like secrets in the marketplace. And traced the soft outlines of crosses and crowns carved into stone. But now it's time to look deeper, not at what the coins meant, but at how they were actually made. Because somewhere between divine authority and practical exchange, someone had to sit down, carve out a design, and start hammering cold, indifferent material into something that whispered, "This has value." And in Aksum, that job wasn't left to chance. You find yourself on the outskirts of the city now, where the clatter of tools and the thick scent of heated clay hang in the air. This is no mint in the modern sense. There's no gleaming factory floor, no conveyor belt jingling with brand new coins. Instead, there's a shaded workshop, open on two sides, with a row of stone benches and a handful of tired-looking men crouched low over tools. A boy fans a small furnace in the corner, where the faint glimmer of copper glows behind a crust of ash. Another man pulls a mold from a shallow pit, wipes it on his tunic, and sprinkles it with fine dust from a bowl. Likely a mixture of sand and powdered clay meant to stop sticking. Here, you get a first-hand look at how Aksum's stone coins were likely created. Most were shaped by hand and eye, carved from slate, schist, or other easily worked stones, cut into small discs or rectangles, then smoothed and polished with worn river pebbles. You watch one craftsman press a simple design into a slab. 3 dots arranged in a triangle, which might be a constellation, a holy trinity, or just a stylized face. With a metal chisel, he etches the edges deeper, and then with a bone-tipped tool, he adds cross-hatching for texture. Another artisan nearby is tapping a small copper coin mold with a short mallet, carefully aligning the die before making his strike. It's a delicate act, not brute force, but precision. Too hard, and the stone splits. Too soft, and the design blurs. He whispers something to himself as he taps, perhaps a prayer, or perhaps just a habit passed down through years of trial and error. When he finishes, he holds the piece up to the sun. It catches no light, but the imprint is clear. A face, bold and wide-eyed, with something like a crown hovering over its forehead. What's fascinating is how rudimentary some of these coins seem today, and yet how technically confident they were for their time. Some show intricate patterns with surprisingly consistent geometry, suggesting the use of early templates. Others are clearly hand-done, uneven and charming, like little clay animations frozen mid-blink. You can tell which were official issues, likely stamped under royal direction, and which were made in outlying workshops, used for local trade or temple offerings. One theory suggests that in rural areas, entire families specialized in minting these stones, with knowledge passed matrilineally through generations, alongside food recipes and lullabies. There's even a story about a grandmother who could replicate any royal crest from memory using only a goose quill and a fishbone. Historians argue whether these family-run operations were sanctioned or tolerated, or whether they were considered a kind of benign counterfeiting, the way village brewers might sell unofficial wine at festivals. What's clear is that the economy tolerated a range of standards. Not every coin had to be perfect. It just had to be believable. As you move further into the workshop, you notice a tray of coins laid out to cool, not from heat, but from handling. The stones have been freshly carved and are resting in a shallow bowl of ash, likely to dry out any moisture absorbed from the air or the artisan's hands. Each one bears a variation of the same image, a stylized sheaf of wheat, arching slightly to one side. The implication is clear: abundance, harvest, wealth tied to land. These weren't just coins. They were messages. A scribe nearby tells you some carried inscriptions in Ge'ez or Sabaean, while others bore abbreviated prayers, dedications to saints, or even the names of local governors. Not all were readable. Some appear as mere patterns to the modern eye, but the artisans knew what they were carving, and their clients likely did too. There's even evidence of spelling errors carved into coins, as if someone misheard an official name or tried to guess a royal title from memory. A fragment recovered from a hill shrine bears the phrase, King Ezano, instead of Azana. Was it a joke? A slip of the chisel? Or a knockoff passed off to villagers who wouldn't care? We may never know. You step outside to a smaller adjoining stall where a group of apprentices is being taught how to file edges evenly. Each boy works slowly, nervously, scraping away at raw discs under the eyes of an elder with a large scar across his cheek and an even larger scar across his patience. One boy drops his coin. It splits clean in half. He winces, but the elder only sighs, picks up the larger fragment, and mutters, "Make it a temple token instead." Nothing was wasted. Not every failed coin became trash. Some were repurposed for non-commercial use: charms, markers, game pieces, or offerings. One stone coin fragment you see bears scorch marks, likely from having been burned in an incense bowl, possibly as part of a prayer ritual. Another has a hole drilled through it, as if worn on a string. Some believe these were trial coins issued to test new carvers. Others insist they were given to children as teaching tools, a kind of ancient economic flashcard. You end your visit to the mint with a final look at the tools. Chisels made from bone and bronze, mallets smoothed by years of use, and shallow wooden trays labeled with symbols you don't understand but feel oddly familiar. These aren't just instruments, they're lineage, passed down through hands that shaped more than currency. They shaped memory, identity, the illusion that even a humble piece of stone could hold power if carved just right. And as you step out into the fading light, that weight is still in your hand. A coin, smooth and imperfect, carved not by machines but by hands that knew what mattered wasn't shine or polish, but trust. And trust, you realize, is always handmade. You've now held the weight of it in your hand. The scratch of the carving, the irregular curve, the faint pressure of belief baked into every groove. But it still lingers in your mind. Why on earth would anyone make a coin out of stone? Not just because it's heavy, though it certainly is, but because it seems so inconvenient. And yet, for the Aksumites, this wasn't merely a workaround for a lack of shiny metal. It was a choice, shaped by culture, geography, and a quiet, stubborn brilliance that understood value doesn't always have to sparkle to command respect. As you walk deeper into the city's central market, still bustling despite the late hour, you begin to see the stone coins with new eyes. They're in motion, passed between hands, tucked into woven sashes, dropped into baskets without ceremony. One boy flips his up into the air and catches it mid-joke, like it's just a smooth skipping stone. It doesn't seem precious, but it does seem familiar, recognized, like a neighbor's face or a vendor's call. You stop by a bread stall, and sure enough, the baker has a handful of these tokens on a cloth beside the flat loaves, each marked with a faded image that looks vaguely like a sunburst. "Too small for gold," she says, smiling, "but good enough for bread." And that's the key. Stone coins didn't try to be everything. They weren't meant to dazzle foreign traders or anchor military pay scales. They were for the spaces between rural markets, temple courts, villages where the nearest silver coin was half a month's journey away. They were accessible, grounded, and deeply tied to local rhythm. You begin to realize that what looked like economic eccentricity might actually have been intentional brilliance. Unlike gold or silver, stone couldn't be melted down, clipped, or repurposed for vanity. You couldn't wear it as jewelry or hide it in your teeth. It had no secondary function. That made it pure currency, uncompromised, immune to fashion, and oddly trustworthy. Historians still debate just how widespread the circulation of these coins really was. Some argue they were primarily used in ceremonial contexts, payments to temples, tributes during festivals, tokens offered to gods in exchange for blessings. Others suggest they were backup currency, minted when metals were scarce or trade routes disrupted. There's even a third camp, admittedly smaller, that proposes stone coins functioned as training money for young merchants, kind of like play currency that accidentally became real when enough people agreed it was. You can see how the lines might blur. When value is built on trust and habit, even a joke coin can become legitimate if it travels far enough and lands in the right pocket. You sit by a small fountain, watching the market slowly fold itself back into the fabric of evening. A man next to you empties a cloth pouch into his lap, half a dozen tokens, some metal, some not. One has been rubbed so smooth it barely resembles a coin anymore. He turns it in his fingers like a prayer bead, then shrugs. "This one's lucky," he says. "Got me 3 goats once. Never spent it again." Another woman nearby claims she once paid a dowry entirely in carved stone discs, each one passed with a kiss and a nod and not a single doubt. You begin to see how money here wasn't just instrumental, it was narrative. A story you could carry. A gesture that moved through time. What makes the stone coins even more fascinating is their tactility. Unlike metal, which can be smooth, cold, and somewhat sterile, stone carries the warmth of the hands that hold it. It feels ancient even when it's new. You pick one up from a roadside altar, perhaps left as an offering, and it's warm from the sun, with tiny chips along the rim like the traces of its journey. There's something oddly humane about it. In a world where metal coinage could alienate or intimidate, these stones felt like they belonged in the grip of farmers, shepherds, and storytellers alike. You return to the main road and pass a group of children playing a counting game with a row of worn coins. They chant softly in rhythm, sliding the stones from one row to the next, marking victories with flat pebbles and defeats with snapped twigs. One boy wins, clutches a coin to his chest, and grins like he's conquered the kingdom. His mother, watching from a doorway, laughs and says, "Don't get used to winning." "That one's my laundry token." "Wait, laundry token?" She nods. "Stone coins are too heavy to steal, so we use them for our water queue." And suddenly, it hits you. These weren't just money. They were tools of organization. Ways to queue, to mark, to trade not just goods, but turns, promises, rituals. They slipped into everyday life with a humility that made them indispensable. A soft currency, in the literal sense. Of course, not everyone loved them. Some Roman merchants found them frustrating, dismissing them as tokens of provincial charm. One Persian traveler wrote disdainfully of a market in which stones were weighed as if they had tasted gold. But others saw the genius. A Chinese record from a visiting envoy describes Aksumite coins as earth-molded to will, a phrase you'll probably be thinking about for the next several hours. One Greek geographer, known for his grumpiness, admitted that Aksum's stone tokens kept better order in their markets than our silver drachmas do in ours. And maybe that's the point. These coins didn't pretend to be universal. They were situational, grounded, honest, like a dialect that doesn't translate well, but carries the weight of meaning for those who speak it. You turn one over in your hand again, admiring how the image has almost entirely faded. But you know someone once carved it, another person used it, and another accepted it. That's a full circle of trust, etched not in gold leaf, but in stone and habit. As twilight slips in, you realize you haven't seen a single vault, no armored guards, no elaborate banking hall. And yet the economy hums. People eat, trade, offer, promise, fulfill, because their wealth isn't stored in ledgers. It's held in the shared understanding of what these stones mean. And that, perhaps more than any shiny coin, is what gives them value. You return to the marketplace early the next morning, moving slowly as the city stretches into waking. The air is cool but already threaded with the scent of roasting lentils, damp earth, and the first sharp bite of wood smoke. As stalls reopen and voices begin to stir, you begin to notice something you hadn't before. not in the noise or the numbers, but in the designs. Everywhere you look, coins, stone or metal, new or worn, are covered in images. Not decorative flourishes, but symbols full of quiet power. Crosses, grain stalks, radiant crowns, clusters of dots, and most striking of all, faces. Wide-eyed, full-jawed, stylized portraits that seem to look through you rather than at you. You begin to understand. These weren't just coins. They were portraits, proclamations, tiny declarations of rule, carried between fingers. You stop at a merchant's table where coins are laid out in neat rows, each one lovingly dusted and arranged like fruit at a high-end stall. Some are made of copper or bronze, still gleaming in places where age hasn't won. Others are the now familiar discs of carved stone, their edges dulled by time. And each carries a head, some cleanly carved, others almost abstract. One has a deeply carved eye, almost unnerving in its intensity. Another shows a ruler wearing what could be either a helmet or an unusually angry loaf of bread. That one's King Caleb, the merchant says, tapping the coin fondly. He paid priests with these. You pick it up. The portrait is stark. Bold lines for cheekbones, a strong nose, and what looks like a thin cross floating above his crown. It doesn't scream wealth. It whispers control. In Aksum, portraiture wasn't just vanity, it was legitimacy. To mint a coin with your own face was to say, I am real. I rule here. You know my features and, therefore, you know my power. You didn't need to meet the king to recognize him. You carried him in your pouch. The early kings used this technique to consolidate their authority. Over time, the faces became more distinct, more personalized. Sometimes they bore elaborate crowns, tall, tiered structures that may have only existed on the coins themselves, never actually worn. Other times, they included symbolic details, spears, staffs, crosses, sometimes a line of script just beneath the chin like a murmured prayer. Historians debate how accurate these portraits really were. Some say they were idealized, stylized to emphasize wisdom, youth, or divine favor. Others believe the artists simply didn't have time or resources to carve every wrinkle and shadow. In either case, the result was effective, a portable monarchy, a face as currency. You look again at King Caleb's coin. It doesn't feel like propaganda in the modern sense. It feels like a signature, a personal mark. A reminder that even in a decentralized trade network, even across great distances, someone still claimed ownership of the system. The face was an anchor. You move on to a different section of the market, one less commercial and more spiritual. Here, coins serve a second role, as devotional offerings. A shrine near the edge of the path is littered with coins bearing religious images, crosses, fish, birds in flight, and geometric patterns some say represent heaven's gates. A man in a white robe is carefully arranging stone discs around a bowl of burning myrrh. Each coin faces upward, its design fully visible. They're not payments, he says when you ask. They're promises. He picks up a coin and shows you its worn edge. This one's been offered 3 times. See the notches? You squint. Sure enough, tiny chisel marks dot the rim, maybe tallying how often it's returned. Some families pass them down, he adds. Each generation adds one. The coins here aren't random. They were chosen, either by symbol or face, to carry meaning into the sacred realm. A woman offers one carved with a wheat stalk and murmurs something about the coming harvest. A boy drops a coin marked with a radiant sunburst, then claps his hands twice before running off. These are personal economies, measured not in value but in hope. You realize these coins aren't just instruments of exchange. They're repositories of emotion, of intent. They encode memory, belief, trust. You walk now with a local artisan who used to carve coins for the outer provinces. He tells you that each image had to be both unmistakable and meaningful. The face shows power, he says, but the back shows purpose. And indeed, many coins from Aksum bore designs on both sides, obverse and reverse, in numismatic terms. One side for the king, the other for the realm. A face and a prayer. A man and his mission. Some kings favored wheat, symbolizing prosperity. Others chose crosses, especially after Christianity took root in the 4th century. Others still picked more esoteric images. A lion mid-roar, a crescent moon flanked by stars, even what some scholars believe is an Aksumite throne, stylized and abstract. Each choice was deliberate, each image a message. You pause again at a quiet corner of the city, where an old man is sorting coins by design. He gestures for you to join him, then lays out a sequence. Stone tokens arranged not by era or weight, but by imagery. See this? He says, pointing to 3 discs. This king used grain, then birds, then flame. He changed as the kingdom did. You nod, understanding. The symbols aren't fixed. They evolve, respond. They aren't just about money. They're about mood, about what mattered in that reign, in that decade, on that side of the mountain. It dawns on you that these coins are like sentences, short and compressed. A face, a symbol, a story. You hold one, simple, worn smooth. The portrait barely visible, just an outline of a head, and on the reverse, a circle within a circle. It might represent the sun, or unity, or a fortress. No one's quite sure, and yet, it speaks. You can feel the intent behind it, even if the details have faded. Like a dream you half remember but still believe in. By the end of the day, your own pouch is heavier than when you arrived. Not with wealth, but with echoes. Each coin a quiet voice, each carving a sigh from the past. And as you walk home under a sky blooming with early stars, you begin to see the faces not just on the coins, but in the air around you. Kings who wanted to be remembered. Rulers who understood that a portrait, even carved into stone, could last longer than a palace. That power wasn't just about possession. It was about recognition. And now, centuries later, you still carry them. Their eyes, their symbols, their names, half remembered, still whispering in your palm. The bells ring low over the rooftops as morning stretches itself awake. You pass through the outer gate of Aksum's main temple precinct, a place where coin and creed have always intersected, though not always in ways you'd expect. The scent of burned juniper lingers in the air, mixing with dust and something faintly metallic. You step lightly past the prayer stones, past the lines of worshippers wrapping white shawls around their shoulders, and you find yourself standing at the edge of something pivotal. The moment when currency stopped being merely secular and began speaking the language of faith. This is where the king met the cross, and where the face on the coin began to wear more than a crown. It began to wear belief. You see, long before Christianity took hold in the highlands, Aksumite coins carried religious symbols. Some featured crescent moons and stars, others depicted stylized altars, flames, or rays of light. But then came King Azana, a name still whispered in the dust of stone churches and carved into the walls of half-forgotten chapels. His conversion to Christianity in the 4th century wasn't just a personal transformation. It was an act of political theology. And his coins? They became the messengers. You walk through a gallery of these coins now, laid out in soft cloth under the watchful eyes of a priest who also doubles as a historian. He holds one up to the morning light. A bronze piece, circular but slightly warped, bearing a cross where a sunburst once glared. This, he says softly, was the turning. On the other side, Azana's face, stylized, serene, with a nimbus not unlike a halo framing his hair. The message was clear: a new faith, a new empire, and a new reason to trust the currency in your hand. What's fascinating is how rapidly these Christian symbols spread. Within a generation, nearly all official coinage bore crosses, some simple, some intricate, interlaced with vines, paired with letters, or flanked by tiny birds. It wasn't just decoration, it was affirmation. You weren't just trading metal or stone, you were participating in a spiritual economy. Coins became tokens of conversion, of legitimacy, of alignment with divine order. Some even carried bilingual inscriptions, one side in Ge'ez and the other in Greek, as if to say, "We speak the language of the world and of heaven." Historians still puzzle over the speed of this shift. Was Azana's conversion sudden, or had Christianity already been spreading quietly among merchants and seafarers? Did the coins lead the people to the cross, or simply reflect a change already blooming under the surface? You pass through a courtyard where a group of boys is being taught the Lord's Prayer by an elderly nun. Around her neck hangs not a cross, but a stone coin on a leather cord. It's worn almost smooth, but you can just make out the carved cruciform shape, bracketed by 4 dots, possibly representing the apostles, or the corners of the earth. She notices you looking and says, "Old money still pays for faith." You believe her. In some churches, you're told, these coins are still offered. Not as currency, but as symbols of penance or thanksgiving. A person might kneel and place one at the base of a saint's icon, whispering a prayer about harvests, children, or regrets. The coin might remain for a day, or be passed along to someone in need. In a land where sacred and secular were rarely separate, the coin became a bridge. And not just in temples. You hear tales of pilgrims carrying stone coins to distant churches, using them as offerings to secure food or lodging along the way. Some bore marks of particular dioceses, early church stamps, rudimentary and proud. Others were blessed before departure and buried under cornerstones of new churches as tokens of sanctified wealth. One merchant, you're told, refused to spend a certain coin for 20 years because he believed the bishop who gave it to him had imbued it with grace. He eventually gave it to a widow after a bad harvest. The coin, they say, made its way back to the same church a decade later, carried by a child whose name no one remembers. But the coin is still there. You stop at a shaded alcove where an archivist lays out a set of transition coins, those minted right around Azana's reign. On one side, an old symbol, a crescent perhaps, or a regal torch. On the other, a tentative cross, small, almost apologetic. You can feel the hesitation in the metal. Change wasn't easy, but it endured. These coins also served a subtler function, diplomatic proof. By inscribing Christian symbols onto state currency, Azana sent a message to distant allies, particularly Byzantium. "We're with you," the coin said, "not just in trade, but in belief." Some even claim that gold Aksumite coins bearing Christian imagery were found as far away as Rome and Constantinople, though others say such stories are half fantasy, half nationalism. Still, the presence of those symbols, especially crosses, vines, and the Greek word, Christos, is undeniable. A kingdom once shrouded in incense and sun now shimmered with Christian prestige. You pause in a cool chapel where sunlight spills through stained quartz windows. The altar is bare except for a bowl filled with old coins, mostly stone, some metal, all bearing faith on their faces. The priest approaches and explains that these coins are given during baptisms and weddings, not as payment, he says, but as witnesses. One coin is cracked, its edge jagged. He runs his finger along it. "Even broken coins carry grace," he murmurs. You leave quietly, your mind turning over the strange intimacy of it all. How a piece of stone, marked with a cross and passed between hands, could become a spiritual contract. Not a relic, not a tool, but a carrier of conviction. As you walk back through the city, the markets are alive again with trade and talk, but now the coins feel different. They're not just economic. They're ethical, devotional, maybe even aspirational. They aren't just stamped. They're blessed. You begin to understand how a kingdom could be ruled not just by armies and laws, but by symbols you could hold. And tonight, as you settle into your cot beneath the flickering light of a half-spent oil lamp, one of those coins lies by your hand. Carved into its rough surface is the face of a king and the sign of a faith that changed an empire, not through conquest, but through carving. You wake to the faint sound of a wooden ladle scraping against a metal pot. A low murmur drifts in from the courtyard below, where someone is preparing lentils, and the scent of cumin and flatbread weaves itself into the morning breeze. Across the threshold, just past the sunbeam creeping across the stone floor, lies a small bowl. Inside it, 4 Aksumite coins, 3 stone, 1 metal, dusted with flour and resting atop a neatly folded piece of linen. You realize you've stumbled into the quiet, lived intersection of belief, barter, and daily survival, where faith-fed coins were never idle. This morning, you're going to follow those coins into their next chapter. How they paid priests and built churches. The woman who left the bowl for you is already halfway down the alley, balancing another on her hip, stopping at doorways with soft knocks and brief exchanges. You trail her at a respectful distance, weaving through narrow lanes lined with homes of clay and stone, their walls worn smooth by the years. She stops at a modest chapel, no high dome or carved spire, just a humble space walled in limestone and flickering with early morning candles. A deacon meets her at the door. She offers the bowl with a nod. No words, just a handoff and a quiet understanding. This is offering, but also maintenance. You watch as he sets it aside, lifts a second bowl already half full, and begins sorting the coins within. Each is assessed, not for purity, but for familiarity. Some are marked with the old kings, others with Christian symbols, still others bearing only wear and smoothness. He sets aside one with a prominent cross, probably meant for use at the altar, and leaves the others in a basket near the ledger, which is made not of parchment but bamboo slats, each tied together with reed string and marked with simple symbols. No copperplate script here, just names, dates, quantities, and faith in repetition. You ask him how long this system has been used. He shrugs. Always, he says, before silver, before tithes. People give what they carry. In Aksum, stone coins weren't only a form of currency, they were a bridge between the secular and the sacred. They paid priests. They funded feasts. They supported the maintenance of shrines, paid the oil vendor who kept the lamps lit, and helped build the walls of churches still standing now, generations later. This wasn't a separation of money and morality. It was a cycle. Coins blessed the altar, and the altar blessed the people. You step inside the church, where the interior is cool and faintly perfumed with frankincense. There's no grand treasury, just a recessed shelf tucked behind a heavy curtain. Inside it, more bowls of coins. Some wrapped in cloth, others labeled with reed tags. One collection, the deacon explains, is earmarked for repairs, a cracked stone lintel, a leaking wall near the baptismal basin. Another is designated for the feast of Saint Frumentius, Aksum's first bishop, said to have baptized Azana himself. Historians still debate how systematic this practice was. Some argue that early Christian leaders in Aksum formalized coin-based giving only after Roman influence intensified, when the idea of church treasuries filtered in with the gold dinars and Byzantine visitors. Others believe it evolved organically, a natural continuation of temple tribute practices, merely redirected toward crosses instead of altars of fire. But the evidence is clear. Coins funded construction. Stone and bronze coins, both, turned prayers into pillars. You walk out toward the outskirts of the city, where an old basilica, half collapsed but still dignified, rises from the ground like a skeleton of holiness. A small team is restoring part of the western wall. Near the base of the foundation, someone has laid out tools, ropes, and a curious row of stone coins embedded directly into the mortar. They're ceremonial, one of the workers says. We place them during construction. Bless the walls. Mark the beginning. Some are carved with crosses. Others with stars. One bears what appears to be a fish with wings. That one's old, he adds. Too old to spend. But it still carries memory. And that's what you begin to notice, the layered value of these coins. They didn't stop working when they left the market. They changed roles. Became symbolic, ceremonial, practical. One woman tells you her grandmother donated the same coin every year at Lent, only to retrieve it again at Easter. A ritual, she says, to give away what you still need, and trust it will return. Inside another chapel, you're shown a wooden chest, dusty, iron-banded, heavy with time. When opened, it reveals not gold, but a dozen stone coins, each one labeled with a tiny tag, the script faded but legible. Roof repair, lamp oil, water jar for pilgrims. This was the budget, a tactile ledger, no accounting columns or parchment scrolls. Just stones with purpose. Even now, a young novice is updating the collection, carefully copying tags and tying them with new thread. You ask why they don't simply replace them with modern coins. She tilts her head. Because these still work. And they do. Not because the marketplace accepts them, but because the community does. These coins aren't currency in the commercial sense, they're commitments. Reminders of continuity. Tools of collective memory. You hear of a family that sponsors the same small chapel every generation, always using a single engraved coin marked with their ancestors' initials. It's not about the money, the current patriarch explains. It's about presence. As evening falls, you sit with a priest beneath the olive trees behind a church built nearly a millennium ago. He speaks slowly, hands folded, a stone coin resting in his lap like a thumb-worn prayer bead. We use them still, he says, because they were made with care. They're not melted or minted with fire. They were shaped with thought. Like liturgy, like stone walls. You listen as the dusk deepens and the lamps flicker to life around the churchyard. The priest continues, when someone gives a coin to the church, they give more than metal. They give memory. A coin made from stone is humble. It expects to be forgotten. But when we keep using it, it becomes holy. And in that quiet glow of faith, flickering through the incense smoke and soft candlelight, you finally understand. This empire didn't build its churches on silver. It built them on trust. On stone. On coins that remembered where they came from, even when the people forgot. By now, you've followed the stone coin from the palace to the port, from the altar to the artisan's bench. But this morning you find yourself somewhere humbler, and perhaps more honest, beneath a canvas awning in a small village market, where the dust kicks up with every sandal and the smell of cumin, goat sweat, and slightly overripe melons wraps around your ankles like a persistent cat. This is where money does its daily work. No gold here, no scrolls, just the rhythm of markets, murmurs, and goat change. The first thing you notice is that no one is using the same system. A farmer swaps a stack of grain for 2 fish and a worn stone coin. A boy buys a reed basket with what looks like 3 seashells and something vaguely coin-shaped with a cracked corner. Nearby, an old woman with a basket full of salt cakes barters with a potter, her currency a tightly wrapped bundle of herbs and a smooth disc carved with what might once have been a lion, or a very proud lizard. It's wonderfully messy, and completely functional. In Aksum, coins didn't exist in isolation. They were part of a layered, hybrid economy, where barter, gifting, memory, and coinage all danced together in a kind of graceful chaos. A system where value wasn't fixed, but interpreted, negotiated, remembered by reputation as much as record. And in the absence of banks, ledgers, or universal coinage standards, it worked because people knew each other, or at least knew who owed whom a favor, whose goats were worth their salt, and whose word meant what. You sit down with a woman selling clay beads and dried apricots. She has a woven basket beside her containing 6 stone coins, a small copper piece, and a folded strip of bark marked with black ink symbols. You ask what it is. She says, it's for measuring promises. You don't press, but you're fascinated. The coins she shows you vary widely, different shapes, thicknesses, and symbols. One bears a triangle, another, a simple 4-petal flower. None have faces. You ask if that matters. She shrugs. Faces are for kings. Flowers are for people like me. Here in the market, coins shift shape and function depending on who's using them. Some are kept for sentimental reasons. Others are passed along like stories. You witness one trade where a man buys a string of onions using a single, flat stone token and a song. Just a few lines, softly sung. It's clearly part of the transaction. The vendor listens, nods, accepts. That's the verse his father wrote, she explains. He sings it whenever he buys onions. It reminds me to trust him. Historians still argue whether this level of informality was common or exceptional. Some point to written records suggesting fixed values. So many coins for a bushel of wheat, a goat worth 3 tokens, that kind of thing. Others argue these were idealized records, not field-tested reality. Because here, in the dirt and noise, coins function more like promissory notes. Tools of memory, signs of mutual recognition, not rigid instruments of law. You pass by a couple negotiating a marriage dowry, or at least something close to it. There's a woven mat between them with small bundles of dried dates, 2 silver rings, a necklace of carved wooden beads, and a few flat stone discs laid carefully in a triangle. One elder stands to the side, nodding at intervals. The final agreement seems to involve 5 measures of grain, a goat, and a carved token bearing the bride's mother's name. A witness presses a thumbprint into the dust beside the mat. It's not a contract in the legal sense, but it's binding. Next, you're invited to a storyteller's circle, where coins take on yet another life, as rewards. Children gather to hear tales from a gray-haired man with a basket full of tokens. At the end of each story, he tosses out a stone disc to the most attentive listener. The coins bear no markings, but the children clutch them like treasure. Later, you learn that certain vendors accept those coins for sweets, honor currency, backed not by weight or metal, but by the authority of a good story. You're beginning to see a pattern. In Aksumite daily life, the coin was a language, and not everyone spoke it the same way. Some used it for trade, others for promise, still others for memory. The symbols mattered less than the relationships they represented. A coin could mean, I trust you, I owe you, or even, I remember you. And in a world without inked contracts or ledgers, that kind of portable meaning was powerful. You sit with an elderly man weaving baskets. He offers you tea and a worn coin carved with a sunburst pattern. This one was given to me at my wedding, he says. It paid for our first week of meals. I've kept it ever since. Sometimes I loan it out when someone needs luck. You ask if anyone's tried to spend it. He smiles. No one would dare. That's not what it's for. Of course, not every transaction is symbolic. You also witness the blunt mechanics of trade. 2 chickens for a sack of millet. A stack of thin fish for 3 discs carved with interlocking triangles. A dispute over whether a chipped coin still counts. In these moments, coinage plays referee. It smooths out awkward trades, levels uneven exchanges, bridges the gap when one side runs short on goods. But even then, the trust remains visible, hovering in the way people nod, glance, or pause just long enough to signal that the coin doesn't just carry value, it confirms it. As the market begins to wind down, you watch a final exchange that stays with you. A man gives his last coin, stone, round, marked with a faint sun, to a girl selling honey. She sees the coin, then him, and nods. "You'll pay me next time," she says, handing over the jar. He smiles. He will. And that's how it worked. Not with vaults. Not with scales. But with memory, gestures, and stone promises. You return to the city after a long day of walking dusty roads and counting promises disguised as coins, your feet aching and the shadows stretching long. Tonight, you've arranged to meet a man who claims to have found something remarkable, or perhaps just odd, in a storage cave beneath a disused shrine. A hidden pocket of ancient Aksumite coin hoards, tucked away not for glory or grandeur, but for reasons no one seems quite able to explain. As you step into the dim stone chamber, the light flickering from his small oil lamp catches the edge of a clay jar, half buried in loose earth, its rim wrapped in waxy cloth. He opens it carefully, reverently, like lifting the lid of a very slow, very quiet question. Inside, coins, not heaps, not glittering masses of gold or silver, but a modest bundle of stone and copper discs, most weathered, some fractured, all smoothed by time. They lie layered like fish scales, stacked with surprising care. Each carries a different marking, crosses, lines, swirls, faces, faint, softened, but still traceable with a patient thumb. You ask him where it came from. He tells you he found it by accident while clearing debris. "There's another under the wall," he adds. "Same kind of coins. Different shapes." What strikes you isn't just the age, it's the fact that these coins were hidden, not lost. They were stored, buried, secured inside containers that suggest a deliberate choice to take them out of circulation. And this wasn't a single incident. As you soon learn, across Aksum and beyond, similar caches have been unearthed. In jars beneath homes, sealed pots buried under church floors, bundles tucked inside wall crevices or wrapped in fabric and left in collapsed storage buildings. Most are small, few contain precious metal, but what they lack in sparkle, they more than make up for in mystery. Historians still debate what these coin hoards actually meant. Were they emergency savings? Burial offerings? Hidden tithes? Personal treasuries? The interpretations shift like dust in sunlight. Some think they were stashed during times of unrest, banditry, war, economic turmoil, and then forgotten. Others argue they served as ritual deposits, offered not to gods or kings, but to time itself, like seeds waiting for a better era. One hoard discovered in the highlands contained both coins and tiny carved amulets, some shaped like ears, eyes, or leaves. Another, found in the remains of a merchant's home, was layered between bricks in the hearth wall, safe, invisible, but unmistakably intentional. Tonight, under this flickering lamplight, you feel like a guest at a quiet ritual. The coins are passed to you one at a time. One bears the familiar stylized crown of Azana. Another is little more than a flat disc with a single raised dot at the center. The man tells you some of these hoards show patterns. Coins grouped not by value, but by type or symbol. One jar contained only crosses. Another, only those marked with wheat. A third, a mix of stone and metal, all featuring variations of what looks like a stylized bird. Could these have been spiritual collections? Offerings gathered over time and buried as part of a religious or familial rite? A form of economic devotion rather than wealth accumulation? Later, you're taken to the edge of a ruined church where a second hoard was found, this time in a broken jar buried under the entry threshold. The priest explains that many early Christian sites embedded coins beneath the foundation during construction. They give the place weight, he says. Not just stones, but witnesses. And indeed, the practice of using coins as cornerstone offerings is documented not just in Aksum, but across other ancient cultures, Byzantine, Egyptian, even early European. What makes the Aksumite examples unique is the inclusion of stone coins alongside metal. It suggests that symbolic value mattered just as much as economic worth. You sit with a young scholar who has catalogued several such hoards. She shows you a sketch of one found near the port. 3 stacked jars, each buried in a triangle, each containing nearly identical sets of coins. They weren't buried randomly, she explains. They were curated. Someone had a system. She speculates they may have belonged to a religious community, possibly traveling missionaries or scribes who wanted to preserve a particular vision of the kingdom's spiritual wealth. Not its gold, but its symbols, etched into stone. And then there's the most haunting theory, that these coin hoards were part of a rescue mission. That as metal grew scarce, temples fell, or kingship fractured, someone gathered the most meaningful pieces of the monetary past. Those bearing the old faces, the earliest crosses, the rarest inscriptions, and hid them, not in fear, but in defiance of forgetting. As if saying, "This mattered. Keep it safe." You begin to feel the full emotional weight of these buried bundles. They weren't dragon hoards or pirate treasure. They were cultural vaults, quiet collections of shared memory, tucked away like lullabies in a box. The coins weren't lost. They were resting. And in finding them, you don't just uncover currency, you uncover stories. Voices. Echoes of a time when every image etched into stone carried hope, protection, or farewell. As you prepare to leave the chamber, the man offers you one final coin to hold. It's cracked, nearly split down the middle, but its symbol remains. A 6-pointed star with a small sun at the center. He tells you he hasn't deciphered its origin, but it showed up in 3 different hoards across 2 valleys. You hand it back gently. It feels less like money now, and more like a message. Outside, the wind has picked up. Dust swirls in tiny spirals, catching in the corners of stones, whispering through fallen leaves. Somewhere beneath your feet, beneath old walls and roots, there are still more jars. More buried tokens. More stories waiting, not for wealth, but for recognition. The sky is bruised with early clouds, and the wind carries the scent of rain when you find yourself back in the heart of Aksum, near the southern edge of the city, where a strange little pavilion juts from the slope of a low hill. There's nothing particularly regal about it. In fact, it looks more like a goat shelter than anything royal. But what draws your attention is the growing cluster of confused merchants loitering nearby, speaking in a tangle of languages, arguing gently in broken Greek and Ge'ez. You wander closer and hear the word repeated more than once: stone. A man in linen lifts a coin, furrows his brow, and shrugs. What is this? He asks no one in particular. And just like that, you've arrived at the curious heart of the stone coin's PR problem. You see, while Aksumite coins made perfect sense within the kingdom, trusted locally, accepted across markets, even honored in temples, they did not always land well with outsiders. Foreign traders, especially those from the Roman, Persian, and even Arabian spheres, often came expecting glitter, gold denarii, polished drachmas, shimmering dinars. What they found instead, more often than not, were pebbles with authority issues. Rounded discs with faces that didn't quite face the right direction. Abstract patterns. Symbols they couldn't read. And worst of all, stone. No weighty metallic ring when dropped. No familiar edge carvings. Just silence and skepticism. You sit on a worn bench beneath a fig tree where a Roman merchant is recounting his story to a pair of equally puzzled Egyptian travelers. They handed me a piece of slate, he says, waving his hands. I thought it was a roof tile. The others laugh. One pulls a token from his pouch, stone, cracked, stamped with a 5-pointed star, and holds it up for inspection. "This," he says, "bought me a chicken. No feathers, but still." And while the tone is mocking, there's also a kind of reluctant admiration in their voices. The coin may not have gleamed, but it had worked. Someone had accepted it. The chicken had tasted fine. This is where Aksum's system collided with its own uniqueness. Its coins, especially the stone ones, were perfectly rational in context, but context isn't something most travelers pack in their saddlebags. To the uninitiated, the lack of metallic currency suggested backwardness, poverty, or, worse, clever trickery. How could a kingdom that claimed dominion over Red Sea trade routes not bother to mint more gold coins? Why were these tokens so inconsistent in size and style? Why did they sometimes feature symbols no one outside the region could interpret? Historians still argue whether this perception was fair. Some suggest Aksum used stone coins primarily for internal, lower-value transactions and reserved its precious metals for international trade. Others believe that at times of metal scarcity, either from disrupted mining routes or geopolitical turmoil, stone currency filled a very real gap. Then there's the fringe camp that insists the stones were never meant as coins at all, but ceremonial weights or symbolic artifacts misinterpreted by modern scholars. But you've held too many. Watched too many passed hand to hand. Bartered for bread. You know these were real, at least to the people who used them. You're invited into a modest home just beyond the central plaza, where a merchant's family keeps a small shrine of trade artifacts. Bits of carved ivory, tiny spice jars, lengths of ancient rope, and yes, a collection of coins from around the world. Roman gold, Persian silver, Chinese copper, and a neat row of Aksumite stone coins. Each one labeled in careful script, each one a conversation piece. The eldest daughter tells you that travelers often gifted coins from their own lands, and the family would display them during feasts. But ours, she adds, pointing to the stone tokens, are the ones that stay in the pouch. You ask why. She smiles. Because we know what they're worth. Still, the misunderstanding lingered. You come across a letter penned by a Byzantine official in the 6th century, preserved on brittle parchment, its ink faded to a pale sepia whisper. He writes, "The Aksumites are hospitable, yes, and fair in trade. But they use stones as money, and I fear they mean to test us." There it is again. Skepticism dressed as diplomacy. Yet the same letter closes with a grudging line, and yet, no merchant leaves hungry. That contradiction says everything. The coin may have baffled, but the trade flourished. Somehow, the system worked. In a small side alley, you find an elderly scribe who has spent decades collecting anecdotes about these interactions. He shows you a ledger, not of prices, but of foreign reactions to Aksumite coins, some amused, some confused, a few downright offended. One entry quotes an Egyptian priest. They offer pebbles with the pride of pharaohs. Another, more admiring, reads, "A man here paid my passage with a flat disc marked with stars. It felt holy." The scribe chuckles and says, "They all laugh. But they take the coins. And they come back." Because beneath the awkward introductions and mismatched expectations, there was something undeniable about the coins. They held authority, not because they shimmered, but because the people believed in them, used them, and wove them into the rhythms of daily life. And once a merchant had accepted one and successfully traded it again, or received goods or services without dispute, the coin became credible, even if it still felt like an odd souvenir. You ask if there were attempts to standardize the image of Aksumite currency abroad. The scribe nods. Some kings, particularly those with ambitions of broader recognition, minted metallic coinage with Greco-Roman features, Greek inscriptions, imperial busts, more familiar motifs. These were the export coins, polished and stamped to impress. But the stone ones? They remained stubbornly local, proudly unique. You pick one up from his collection. It's unassuming, circular, with a faint wheat motif and a single etched line running along the edge. This one, he says, paid for 2 weddings, a wall, and a broken window. You raise an eyebrow. In that order? In reverse, he smiles. As twilight begins to fall, you stroll back through the plaza, listening to the calls of merchants packing up for the night. A Roman trader stops you. You still have that little stone? You nod. Keep it, he says. It'll confuse someone else tomorrow. But there's warmth in his voice. Respect, even, because now he knows it's not a mistake. It's a system, a culture, a confidence in the familiar, even when the world expects something shinier. And so the Aksumite coin, despite its humble material and misunderstood design, continued to pass between hands, laughed at, puzzled over, sometimes mistrusted, but always used. Because when value is measured in trust and repetition, even a pebble can become a promise. The morning unfolds like a quiet parchment, creased at the edges, soft with the weight of history. You're sitting by a window overlooking the dusty stretch of road that threads its way north toward the sea, where caravans once trudged and traders paused to catch their breath. And as you sip something warm and vaguely spiced, your host unrolls a map on the table. It's hand-drawn, its borders both ancient and wishful, showing the reach of an empire that dared to stretch from the African highlands to the southern edges of Arabia. And right there, hugging the coastline like a footnote to someone else's history, lies the key to today's chapter. The moment when Rome finally paid attention. You see, Aksum wasn't just some hidden kingdom nestled in the foggy heights of the Horn of Africa. It was a trading powerhouse, quietly anchoring the Red Sea while everyone else tried to sail past it. And Rome, slowly, reluctantly, but inevitably, had to acknowledge that fact. Not because of its armies, not because of its missionaries, but because of something far more compelling: commerce, and the coins that kept showing up in places no one expected. You head to the archives of a former merchant house, now converted into a modest museum. Inside, you're shown a glass case filled with Aksumite gold coins, actual gold this time, not stone. Bright, flattened discs stamped with kings who stare out at you with blank resolve, framed by inscriptions in Greek. Bacileyc Aramudekusaianpak, King Alexander, though no one is quite sure who he really was. The Greek lettering was deliberate. These coins weren't meant for local use. They were the kingdom's international handshake, minted to speak Rome's language, to look like they belonged in the pockets of imperial governors and Alexandrian traders. Historians still puzzle over how these coins came to be so widespread. Some have been found as far west as Italy, buried in hoards alongside Roman aurei. Others turned up in shipwrecks off the Arabian coast, alongside amphorae and ivory combs. One particularly curious find? A single Aksumite gold coin discovered in a hoard in southern India, nestled among Kushan currency and Roman silver. Aksum, it seemed, was everywhere, and nowhere, all at once. And it wasn't just the coins themselves, it was what they represented. When Roman merchants docked at Adulis, Aksum's chief port, they weren't just picking up spices and ivory. They were dealing with a kingdom that minted its own currency, regulated trade, taxed goods efficiently, and knew the value of image. One letter from a Roman administrator refers to Aksumite traders as keen-eyed men who speak in silver and listen in gold. A backhanded compliment, but a revealing one. The Romans understood. Aksum was no backwater. It was a pier. You walk through the warehouse where these gold coins were likely counted, weighed, and exchanged. The floorboards are uneven, the walls thick with salt air. In one corner, a ledger is etched into stone, numbers, dates, symbols. A faded diagram shows the weight conversions between Aksumite gold and Roman currency. The conversion rate isn't always fixed. It depends on season, supply, and probably the mood of the scribe that day. But the fact that such a table exists at all speaks volumes. What's striking is how Aksum managed to play both sides of the economic coin. At home, it circulated stone and copper, rooted in daily life and local trust. Abroad, it deployed gold propaganda, polished, foreign-lettered, and designed to fit neatly into other economies. It didn't try to impress Rome by becoming Rome. It simply presented itself as compatible, capable, quietly confident. And Rome responded, not with fanfare, but with respect. One Roman writer refers to the Aksumite king as friend of the empire, a designation with specific diplomatic weight. Another calls Aksum a nation of traders who build their temples higher than our walls. Hyperbole, maybe, but that's the point. Aksum inspired rhetoric. It got noticed. Later, you walk through the ruins of a trade outpost, stone platforms, low walls, rusted anchors. Here, goods from 3 continents passed hands, and coins passed pockets. Among the detritus, archaeologists found both Roman and Aksumite currency, sometimes buried together, sometimes filed in jars with inscriptions matching local shrine records. One jar had alternating layers of gold and stone coins, as if someone were curating a museum of empires before museums existed. But there's a moment that lingers, a single coin minted under King Caleb, whose reign came centuries after Azana's but still shimmered with imperial ambition. One side bears his name. The other? A cross flanked by Greek letters and stylized lilies. You hold a replica in your hand. It's small, radiant, and unnervingly modern in its design. The weight of it sits between your fingers like a question. Was this made for trade, for tribute, or for memory? Perhaps all 3. You end your day beside the old Roman quarter. Yes, there was one, where foreign traders once rented homes, argued about tariffs, and tried to decipher local coinage without insulting anyone. The street is empty now, overgrown, the shadows long. But in the dust, you find the faint imprint of a coin that must have been dropped long ago, a circle pressed into the stone. Not gold, not silver, just the memory of one. A silent footprint of value. And as the wind stirs the leaves overhead, you feel the legacy of that quiet economic dance. Aksum didn't conquer Rome. It didn't dazzle with legions or epics. It simply showed up in the marketplace, spoke in coins, smiled politely, and waited for the empire to realize it had competition. And it did. Not with war. Not with monuments, but with money that crossed oceans and stories that crossed time. Rain begins to fall in slow, steady drops as you walk through a quiet garden tucked behind a scholar's house, where flowering shrubs drip softly and the air smells faintly of mint and wet parchment. Inside the scholar's study, the room is dim, its walls crowded with scrolls, chipped pottery, and narrow wooden shelves that bow beneath the weight of old theories. He's been expecting you, and without speaking, he unrolls a long strip of linen across his desk. Upon it, a series of Aksumite coins, not arranged by date or ruler, but by language. This, he says, tapping a copper coin, is where we stop thinking about economy and start talking about identity. It takes you a moment to see what he means. The coins look ordinary at first, worn, varied, all the familiar symbols. But then you catch it, the scripts. One coin bears a tidy ring of Greek letters, another is marked in South Arabian script, while a third carries the flowing curves of early Ge'ez, Aksum's own written language. This, he continues, is the evolution of voice. You're about to embark on the tangled, fascinating journey of Sabaean scripts and foreign fits, when the currency of an empire also became its grammar lesson. You begin with the oldest coins. They speak not in Aksumite terms, but in the language of the Sabaeans, the South Arabian civilization that once ruled trade routes and whose culture deeply influenced early Aksum. The inscriptions are formal, full of divine names and royal declarations, etched in tall, narrow characters that look like fence posts leaning in prayer. These coins are echoes from the time when Aksum was still learning how to write its own name, borrowing script, style, even phrasing from across the sea. The scholar explains that this was more than convenience, it was strategy. By using a script recognized by Arabian traders, Aksum signaled familiarity. Competence, a willingness to speak the language of commerce before asserting its own. But things change. Fast forward a few reigns and the script begins to shift. G's starts to appear, first tentatively, then proudly. The letters widen. The serifs soften. There's a rhythm to it that feels local, almost musical, especially when carved into the soft volcanic stone Aksumite artisans preferred. Some coins mix languages, a kind of numismatic code switching. A G's phrase on one side, Greek on the other. It's not confusion, the scholar says. It's clarity. To the locals, it speaks home. To the foreigners, it says, "We belong in your ledgers." The Greek inscriptions are especially telling. They don't always make sense. Some are grammatically incorrect, others misspell names. On one coin, King of Kings is rendered as something closer to King of Chickens, though the tone is still authoritative. These aren't the mistakes of ignorance, though. They're the growing pains of adaptation. The scholar pulls out one coin with a perfectly carved Greek inscription. Toytoarechristianois. May this please the Christians. It's a bold statement, and not just in theology. It's a linguistic invitation, declaring allegiance not just to a religion but to a shared world of traders, scribes, and empires who read from left to right. You begin to realize how revolutionary this was. Aksum didn't just change the material of its currency, it changed its syntax. The very form of its coins evolved to reflect the empire's expanding worldview. Greek for external diplomacy, G's for internal cohesion, and sometimes both together, because identity wasn't singular, it was layered. You walk over to the scholar's back table, where larger ceremonial tokens are displayed. These weren't used in the marketplace. They were minted for rituals, possibly coronations or temple dedications. One bears an inscription so worn it's barely visible, but the scholar reads it from memory. The face of the king is the face of peace. Below it, a single cross, and beneath that, a sequence of letters in 3 scripts, spiraling around the edge like a whispered prayer. It was meant to be read aloud, he says, by 3 people, each fluent in a different language. Even the shape of the letters tells stories. Early South Arabian inscriptions are sharp, formal, uncompromising. They read like decrees carved into stone walls. G's, by contrast, flows. It curves like a smile. It was designed not just for chisels, but for speaking, for singing. Greek, meanwhile, gives the coins an international sheen, less poetic, perhaps, but efficient. Recognizable, a pass into foreign ports. And yet, there's something else. The scholar gestures toward a particularly unusual coin. This one, he says, shouldn't exist. It's made of stone, but the inscription is in Latin, or something trying to be. The words don't quite line up. There's an S reversed, a V. That might be a U. A local attempt at Roman mimicry, he says. Or maybe a gift made for a visiting ambassador. Either way, it shows how far Aksum reached, and how deeply it listened. Outside, the rain is fading. You leave the study with your head full of alphabets, your hands itching to trace every loop and curve from memory. In the street, a boy runs past, flipping a coin in the air. It lands, clatters on the stones, and for a moment, you catch the flash of a cross above a line of text. You can't read it, not yet, but you feel it. That strange hum of language pressed into stone. Because in Aksum, a coin was never just a medium of exchange. It was a mouthpiece, a way to speak across markets and miles, across faiths and scripts, across centuries. And somehow, despite the wear, it still speaks. The sun hangs heavy over the stone plaza, its heat soaking into the flagstones and wrapping the city in a lazy shimmer. You're seated under the edge of a colonnade, watching the crowd move like water through the market square, when a boy darts past holding a coin up like a prize. He's grinning, beaming, yelling something about a lion's face and a lucky trade. The coin glints briefly in the light before vanishing into his pocket, but you saw it, wide, flat, unmistakably carved with a human face, though stylized in that peculiar Aksumite way. All angles and intention. And suddenly you're pulled straight into the empire's most enduring habit, turning its rulers into literal heads of state. In Aksum, coinage was more than economy. It was branding. Every king, from the most warlike to the most contemplative, minted their face into circulation, pressing it into stone or metal and sending it out into the hands of farmers, merchants, priests, and pilgrims. Some of these faces were plain, almost geometric, an oval head, a triangle nose, a faint suggestion of hair. Others were elaborate. High crowns, detailed earrings, almond eyes lined with stylized lashes. The artistry varied, but the message was always the same. I am here. I am king. You carry me in your pocket. You browse through a table set up by a coin seller in the marketplace, his fingers calloused from years of sorting, his tongue sharp with pride. He shows you an early copper coin bearing a stern, forward-facing portrait with a closely trimmed beard and a tall, fluted crown. That's Waziba, he says, tapping the image. He ruled only briefly, but his coins were bold. He made the first to use G's script. You turn the coin over. There's the script, tight and decisive, wrapped around the royal image like a protective ring. It's not just a face. It's a claim. Rulers in Aksum understood the power of iconography. They knew that even if no one saw them in person, their likeness could still travel, etched into currency that slipped across borders and into marketplaces far beyond their reach. And while some ancient cultures kept royal imagery exclusive to temples or palaces, Aksum's kings seemed to understand that influence was more potent when it was portable. Each coin was a messenger, a piece of propaganda in every palm. Some portraits aimed for majesty. Others leaned into recognizability. A few, perhaps accidentally, veered into caricature. You're shown one coin that's locally famous for its exaggerated features, giant eyes, a lopsided mouth, and a crown so grand it appears to be falling off. That's not an insult, the seller says. That's charisma. You ask whether people mocked it. He shrugs. They spent it. That's what mattered. What's curious is how consistent the features often are. Broad foreheads, wide eyes, neatly trimmed beards. It suggests that these weren't individual portraits in the Roman sense, but archetypes, the idea of a king more than his actual face. Historians still debate whether these likenesses were drawn from life or based on a generic royal template passed down through generations. Some point to repeated symbols. A small crescent on the cheek, a line through the eye, a subtle tilt to the mouth that shows up on coins from kings a century apart. Was it inherited style, artistic habit, or deliberate continuity? Then there's the matter of crowns. Aksumite kings wore some of the most elaborate headgear in numismatic history, at least on their coins. Tall, tiered, often radiating lines like sunbeams, these crowns were likely ceremonial, too cumbersome for daily use but powerful in their symbolism. They said, "This is not just a man, it is a sovereign body." You begin to wonder if the real crown even existed, or if it was born entirely from artistic license, an imagined icon made to match the myth. You visit a small monastery outside the city where monks keep a modest trove of Aksumite coins, including one showing multiple faces. 3 heads in a row, nearly identical, with slight variations in beard length and crown detail. The monk explains. This one shows the king and his sons. It says succession is secure. You nod, thinking how the image isn't just a representation of power, it's a promise of continuity. The monks also share coins featuring kings side by side with religious symbols, crosses, stars, doves. The implication is clear. The king rules with divine approval. Some coins even have the ruler's bust encircled by radiating lines, like a sun, perhaps indicating a halo or divine light. You touch one of these coins and realize how intimate this message was. In your hand, you held both king and god, joined by metal, by stone, by faith. Later, in the home of a retired scribe, you leaf through drawings of rare coins where kings appear in profile, their features sharp, thoughtful, turned toward something just out of sight. These, the scribe says, show vision. He smiles, proud, not just rule, but direction. It's romantic, maybe, but you feel it. The sense that even the angle of a jawline could convey purpose. And then, the final flourish, the eyes. Large, unblinking, often disproportionately emphasized. You ask the scribe why. He leans back, folds his hands. Eyes are memory, he says. They see you. You don't forget a coin that watches back. You think of all the hands that passed these coins. All the eyes that met these carved gazes. 1,000 tiny encounters with authority, belief, legacy. As dusk falls, you return to the square where the boy from this morning still plays, now with a different coin, spinning it on its edge like a top. It wobbles, slows, falls flat. He grins. You ask him if he knows whose face is on it. He shrugs. One of the old ones, he says. They all look the same. And maybe they do. But each carried its moment. Each carved a king into motion. Each became a face remembered. Not in portraits, but in palms. You begin your morning in a narrow courtyard behind the scribe's house, where dust clings to everything, even the air. The scribe has gone, but his grandson remains, seated on a low stool, carefully polishing a coin with a bit of cloth. Not too hard, he mutters, more to himself than to you. You rub off the story if you're not careful. You sit across from him as he opens a battered cloth pouch and empties its contents between you, stone, copper, and bronze coins of all kinds, many worn to near blankness. Some are real, he says. Some aren't, and that's where your next path begins. Into the world of counterfeits, clippings, and coin crimes. A reminder that no matter how noble the system, someone will always try to bend it. In Aksum, coinage operated on trust, but trust never existed in a vacuum. The very same qualities that made Aksumite currency adaptable, local production, symbolic imagery, multiple materials, also made it vulnerable to imitation and abuse. Some forgers carved near-perfect replicas of official tokens. Others, less ambitious or more desperate, simply passed off blank stones as coins, hoping the recipient was too rushed or too polite to inspect the edge. And then there were the clippers, those who trimmed small shavings off the edges of metal coins, enough to melt and resell, not enough to be noticed at first glance. You visit the edge of the city where a small group of metalworkers still maintains a forge used more for repairs than minting. One of them shows you a small pile of coins with irregular edges, some neatly trimmed, others crudely gouged. They thought no one would notice, he says, squinting. But everyone did. Clipping, it turns out, wasn't just an economic annoyance. It was a violation of image. To damage a coin was to diminish the king, to deface a symbol of both authority and divine blessing. It wasn't just fraud, it was sacrilege. Punishments varied. In some periods, coin crimes were treated with mild reprimand, repayment, restitution, perhaps temporary exile from markets. But in others, particularly during times of instability, the offense carried heavier weight. One legend speaks of a man who counterfeited copper coins by pressing designs into heated wax molds, then hardening the cast with a mixture of clay and ash. He was caught when a priest noticed the coin crumbled in water during a temple blessing. His sentence? Public humiliation and a ban from all temple grounds. Harsh, perhaps, but in a society where currency blurred the lines between trade and faith, the betrayal was deeply personal. Historians still argue how widespread forgery truly was. Some suggest it was rare, a footnote in an otherwise stable system. Others believe it was common enough to require frequent recalibration of trust, not just in coins, but in people. What's certain is that Aksum responded not with paranoia, but with adaptation. You visit a market shrine where merchants used to bless their coins before important transactions. The priest explains. They brought them here to be seen. Not by me, by each other. It was a public gesture, transparent, communal. A way to say, these are mine. I trust them. Do you? You're shown a set of coins marked with small secondary notches, likely added by merchants to verify authenticity. Not royal inscriptions, just quick signs, visible at a glance, confirming that a particular token had passed through trusted hands. Some even bore the names of local markets carved along the rim, like little return addresses. In a world without centralized mint control or regular quality checks, reputation became currency's backbone. Then there's the matter of fake symbols. Some forgers didn't just replicate coins, they invented new ones, hoping novelty would pass for legitimacy. You handle one such piece, circular and well-balanced, bearing what looks like a hybrid between a fish and a sheaf of wheat. The lines are confident, the weight plausible. But the symbol? We don't recognize it, says a local collector. Could be someone trying to start their own mint. And why not? If coins function as belief, then forging isn't just theft, it's unauthorized storytelling. Even more curious are the blank coins, stone or metal discs with no markings at all. Were they unfinished, meant for future inscriptions? Or were they used in a different way entirely, as placeholders, tokens, or symbolic items exchanged in rituals or games? One theory holds that blank coins were issued during shortages, their value assigned verbally at point of use, then retired soon after. Another posits that blank coins were intentionally neutral, meant for barter between feuding factions unwilling to acknowledge each other's kings. You sit now with an elderly woman who keeps a small tin box under her bed. Inside are 2 coins, both unmarked but well worn, and a folded bit of parchment with a child's name scrawled in faded ink. She explains that during a famine, these coins were used in her village to track food rations. One coin earned a portion of grain, the other, a water jug. No one ever carved them, but everyone remembered what they meant. We didn't need a face, she says. We needed a promise. And that's the other truth about counterfeit coins. Some weren't malicious. They were makeshift solutions, born of necessity. In remote villages, when royal minting slowed or trade thinned out, people made their own. They didn't call it counterfeiting. They called it continuing. A local blacksmith tells you how his grandfather used to press coins from scrap metal during a siege. He copied the king's face, he says, but gave it a smile. Said we needed one. As the day winds down, you reflect on how these imperfections, these forgeries, fakes, and informal fix-its, didn't destroy the system. They became part of it. Aksum's economy didn't crumble under the weight of clipped coins or blank tokens. It adapted, it watched, it remembered. A coin could lie, But the people learn to listen between the lines. So next time someone hands you a coin with a chipped edge, or a face that seems too cheerful, or a symbol you don't quite recognize, don't be too quick to judge. It might not be fake. It might just be a story. Or a smile someone carved when the world needed one. The sun is barely up when you join the potters at the river's edge, their hands already deep in clay, their conversation muffled by the wet slap of earth on wheel. Today's visit isn't about minting or inscriptions or imperial imagery. It's about something more practical, almost annoyingly so. What happened when coins, stone ones especially, broke, cracked, chipped, or wore down until their royal face looked more like a squashed apricot? Because no matter how sacred the symbol, no coin was immortal. This morning, you're walking into the forgotten world of what to do with a broken coin. You hold one in your hand now. A once oval stone token that's been split clean down the middle, the image. Maybe a sheaf of barley or the side profile of a king. Reduced to a faint curve and some orphaned lines. It's still weighty, still familiar in size, but is it still usable? That depends entirely on who's answering the question. You ask one potter, who wipes his hands and shrugs. If you can recognize the mark, it counts. You ask another, who scowls. Half a coin? Half a goat, maybe. In Aksum, broken coins inhabited a liminal space. Not quite valid, not quite trash. They were the ancient world's version of expired ID cards, still recognizable, but no longer fully convincing. And yet, many were kept, repurposed, even ritualized. Some were reinserted into local economies at reduced value, used for smaller purchases, or accepted only by certain vendors. One priest in the Northern Highlands reportedly accepted only damaged coins for temple donations, saying they had already proven they could endure. There's a subtle poetry to that logic. Historians still debate whether there was any official policy toward broken coinage. A few records suggest that tax collectors refused them outright, too easy to forge, too difficult to verify. Others hint that village elders might gather damaged coins once a year and present them to a local mint or shrine for replacement, trade-in, or blessing. A kind of community refund. But in most cases, the system seems to have operated on mutual understanding. If the break was clean and the symbol still visible, it could still serve as a token of value, especially in markets where trust carried more weight than royal sanction. You're led now into a stone house tucked behind a fig grove, where an old woman keeps a collection of fractured currency. Not displayed like treasures, but sorted into small baskets by shape and usage. One group is labeled roof coins, used to weigh down woven mats during the dry season. Another bears the faint smell of oil and spice. She explains these are kitchen coins, used to grind herbs or wedge open tightly sealed jars. You smile at the idea that a coin could live an afterlife as a household tool. She hands you a sliver barely larger than a fingernail. This one, she says, was a prayer once. Then a charm. Then a keepsake. My grandmother used to tie it in her hair. That wasn't uncommon. Broken coins often slipped into symbolic roles once they were too damaged to spend. They became amulets, game pieces, decorative elements sewn into tunics or woven into belts. In some regions, they were placed under sleeping mats to ward off bad dreams, or dropped into grain jars to protect the harvest. One rare account describes cracked stone tokens being placed under the tongues of the dead, part offering, part passport. Not to pay Karen, perhaps, but to remind the next world who the person had been in this one. You visit a small village where the blacksmiths keep a wishing wall near their forge, embedded with hundreds of broken coins, most pressed in with the thumb, their edges jutting out like scales. The coins come from all over, Aksumite, Roman, even unidentifiable fragments. Each was placed there as part of a vow or request. If a coin is broken, one elder tells you, it can't be used again. So it must be offered. The wall gleams faintly in the morning light, not gold, not silver, but something stronger, the shimmer of repurposed belief. Not all broken coins were revered, though. Some were simply discarded, tossed into wells or buried under floorboards. You walk through a ruined house in a now abandoned village, where archaeologists recently discovered a bundle of fractured tokens hidden beneath a cooking hearth. Why there? Possibly because it was convenient. Possibly because the house's last inhabitant believed that hiding a coin under fire would return its value to the gods. You can't ask them. All you have is the coin, its surface scraped, its meaning faded, but its presence deliberate. Sometimes, the breaks weren't accidental. In one region, young couples would snap a coin in half during betrothal, each keeping a piece as a vow of return. You're shown one such pair, now worn smooth, no longer spendable, but still cradled in a linen pouch by a widow who once carried it in her bridal sash. He took his half to the war, she says. I still have mine. She doesn't cry when she says it. She just smiles. Then there's the tale of the wounded king. A copper coin bearing a ruler's face, deliberately struck with a chisel across the cheek. Some claim it was a political protest. Others believe it was used in healing rituals, where damaging the king's image symbolically drew out a sickness. You hold one such coin now. The line across the face is clean but brutal. And yet, the eye remains. Watching. Enduring. Before you leave the village, a young girl presses a tiny coin shard into your hand. It's almost meaningless to modern eyes. But she insists it brings luck. Only if you don't try to spend it, she says. It doesn't want that anymore. You slip it into your bag, unsure whether to believe her. But also unsure whether it matters. Because the truth is, in Aksum, value wasn't just in the spending. It was in the recognition. The memory. The ability to find worth in something that had cracked but not vanished. Even a broken coin carried its story. And in a world built on stories, that was more than enough. You're walking uphill again, boots powdered in dry red dust, breath caught somewhere between effort and memory. The city lies quiet behind you, its rooftops barely visible through the low haze. Before you, just past a knotted clump of eucalyptus trees, sprawls a silent graveyard of trade. Crumbled terraces, fractured stone walls, scattered shards of pottery glinting like fish scales in the grass. This is what's left of a once bustling suburb, a place where goods were weighed, taxes assessed, and coins clinked, or rather, thudded, between calloused hands. But now there's silence, save for the wind curling past broken lintels. You're here to witness the slow, nearly soundless decline of Aksumite currency, the long fade of stone and metal, of faith and face, until all that's left is a kingdom in mint condition no longer. It didn't happen suddenly. Declines rarely do. They sprawl. They stall. They whisper before they roar. Aksum's economy, once a marvel of hybrid coinage, clever taxation, and symbolic reach, began to unravel under pressures both local and global. Droughts shrank crops. Trade routes shifted. Ports silted in. And somewhere along the line, coins, once pulsing with value and promise, began to lose their meaning. You crouch by a patch of earth recently turned by archaeologists. Among the terracotta and bone, they've found dozens of coins, mostly copper, a few stone, all worn flat. The curious part? Many are stacked, wrapped in cloth, and never spent. It's as if someone buried them while they still meant something, hoping value would return someday like spring rain. One bundle contains coins from 4 different reigns, all bearing similar symbols: a sheaf of wheat, a cross, a stylized fish. These were not random accumulations. They were collections. But by the time they were buried, The currency they represented had already lost its power to buy. Historians still argue about what caused the monetary unraveling. Some blame external trade collapse. Aksum's reliance on Red Sea commerce had long tied its fortunes to the stability of Rome and Byzantium. When those empires weakened or rerouted their shipping lanes, Aksum's access to foreign bullion dried up. Others point to environmental decay, deforestation, exhausted soil, shifting rivers. As agriculture declined, so did taxable surplus. With less trade and fewer goods moving, coins, particularly the more ceremonial stone ones, stopped moving too. But the decline wasn't just economic. It was symbolic. You visit a churchyard where a crumbling wall has been patched with fragments of stone coins. Literally embedded into the mortar, they hold the structure together now, currency reduced to brick filler. Some still bear crosses. Others show partial faces, half a king's brow or the curved hint of a crown. They once anchored markets. Now they prop up prayer. Inside the church, the deacon shows you a copper coin used as a candle weight, melted wax pooled around the rim. "We use what we have," he says. They hold the flame steady. That's Aksum in decline, not broken, not vanished. Just repurposed. The coins didn't disappear. They changed jobs. You find more evidence in the records of a 7th century tax ledger, one of the last before the system faded entirely. It lists dues not in coins, but in livestock, grain, and labor hours. One line mentions a man offering 3 stone tokens and being refused. "Too soft," the scribe notes. No mark. It's not anger, just exhaustion. The economy had grown tired of symbols that no longer delivered. Even the kings tried to adjust. Later coinage from the twilight years of the empire shows hasty minting, lazy inscriptions, recycled motifs. One coin bears a cross so faint it looks like a scratch. Another repeats a prior king's name in slightly altered form, possibly an attempt to recapture lost legitimacy by mimicking former strength. You ask a scholar whether these kings still believed in their coinage. She sighs. They believed in memory, she says. They hoped people would remember when the image meant something. Some coins vanished into hoards, hidden in walls or sunk into jars and forgotten. Others were taken abroad, where they were misidentified, misfiled, or melted down. A handful ended up in museums. A few more in private collections. But most were left behind, ground into the dust, unremarked, the echo of value trailing off into silence. You stop at a village near the mountains, where a child hands you a flat gray pebble. "It's a king's stone," she says. "For luck." You turn it over. Faint lines suggest it once bore an image, perhaps a star or a cross. She doesn't know. She wasn't taught, but she believes it's lucky. And maybe that's enough. Because even in decline, Aksumite coinage refused to disappear entirely. It became something else. A memory device, a symbolic artifact, a cultural ghost. Coins stopped buying, but they kept being held. They slipped into rituals, into stories, into pockets where they were no longer currency, but companions. And in that strange, slow fade, there's dignity. A reminder that value doesn't only live in trade or decree. Sometimes, it lives in touch. In the habit of carrying a token that once meant something, even if the world has moved on. The empire dwindled. The ports emptied. The mints went cold. But the coins remained. Quiet, useless, familiar. And that, somehow, was enough. The wind has changed by morning. It carries the faint chill of the mountains now, and with it, the kind of clarity that only comes after decline. That moment when a civilization no longer has to prove its wealth or power, only its legacy. You walk alongside a dry canal once used to direct water into Aksum's lower quarters. Its stones are still neatly stacked, though no water has flowed there for centuries. You pause by a small shrine wedged into a wall. Inside it, nestled between votive candles and dried flower stems, rests a coin. Not gold, not silver, just stone. Worn, cracked, entirely unremarkable. And yet someone still believed it belonged there. By now, you've come to understand that in Aksum, coins weren't just money. They were memories in circulation. As the formal economy faded, and trade routes turned elsewhere, and the kingdom receded into myth, the coins kept moving, not through markets, but through hands, stories, inheritance. This section of your journey is about those final chapters. The afterlives of Aksumite currency, and how it endured, not as capital, but as culture. You're welcomed into a household where the grandmother keeps a basket of old tokens by the hearth. They're not used for buying or measuring anymore. They're used for teaching. My granddaughter matches them by shape, she says, holding up two nearly identical stone discs. I tell her which king is which. Though really, I'm guessing. She chuckles, then adds, "They're stories now." That's enough. One coin has been repurposed as a button for a ceremonial shawl. Another rests beneath a cup to keep it level. A third, the grandmother swears, cures headaches if you hold it to your temple long enough and think kind thoughts. In the Highland monastery of Debre Damo, the monks show you an entire wall inlaid with Aksumite coins, arranged not by value, but by symbol. Crosses dominate. Some are simple, others resemble flowering stars or vines. Each one is positioned like a bead in a rosary, forming a path that encircles a doorway leading to the chapel's inner sanctum. It's a timeline, one monk explains. Not for kings, for blessings. He points out one particularly old coin, a flat stone disc bearing a circle within a square. That one was found in a child's grave. We placed it here to remember the smallest among us. You ask how they verify which coin is which. He shrugs. You don't need a name to remember someone. Elsewhere, coins have taken on ritual lives. In a village market, a vendor shows you a cracked copper token she uses to mark the first sale of each day. It's good luck, she says. I keep it in my hand until someone buys bread. Then I put it away. That way, I always remember how the day began. In a wedding ceremony, you see a bride tuck a coin into her sandal. For steadiness, her aunt whispers. At a burial, an elderly man presses a worn token into the soil beside the grave. It's from his father, he murmurs. Just in case they meet. And then there are the storytellers, the oral historians who carry these coins not as currency, but as prompts. You meet one such man seated beneath a tamarind tree, a woven satchel at his side. He spreads out 7 coins before him, stone and metal, marked and unmarked. Each is a tale, he says. One tells the story of a king who built a stela so tall it kissed the moon. Another, of a widow who fed her entire village with a single silver coin that never ran out. That one, he adds, holding up a flat, featureless token, is the coin of forgetting. When you pass it to someone, you forgive them. You ask if the story is true. It is, he replies, every time I tell it. These aren't isolated anecdotes. Across the former reach of Aksum, from the highlands of Tigray to the coastlines once patrolled by its fleets, coins have persisted not in vaults or treasuries, but in ritual, habit, and folklore. They appear in lullabies, in curses, in bedtime riddles. One game, played by children using smooth stones, is still called the King's Hand. You watch a pair of siblings argue over whether the winner gets the crown stone or the cross stone, each carved long ago, passed down like heirlooms with no official value but undeniable presence. Even the scholars you meet, those working in archives and catalogs, confess that their favorite coins aren't the rare gold ones or the well-preserved silver. I like the ones with stories attached, one says. A coin that someone wore for protection, or found in a wall, or tied to a letter. Those are the ones that lived. And live they still do. One archaeologist carries a broken token in his pocket every day. It's good for remembering, he says. Not just the kingdom, but the fact that value changes. And memory fills the gap. In Aksum's twilight, as trade diminished and minting ceased, coins ceased to function as units of economy and instead transformed into portable relics. Not sacred in the temple sense, but personal, communal, narrative. They became ways of marking meaning. In a world that had outgrown their original purpose, they adapted again. Less about commerce, more about continuity. And isn't that what all money eventually becomes? Not wealth, but witness. Something that says, we were here. We believed. We touched. We traded. We built something. And even when the kingdom fell silent, its coins kept speaking, softly, persistently, through hands and homes and the hush of story. You wake with the soft clatter of stones being sorted in a nearby room. Through the thin woven curtain, you glimpse the silhouette of an old man, hunched but deft, passing coins between his fingers, placing some in one basket, others in a wooden drawer. The rhythm is familiar now. Coins not as currency, but as companions. Today, though, your path winds toward a different kind of collection. You've heard rumors of a building at the edge of the old city, one that holds the quiet ambition of a kingdom long faded. Aksum's first and last attempt at a coin archive. It's not a grand structure. More like a repurposed granary, its thick walls baked by centuries of sun, its entrance low enough to make you duck. But inside, the room hums with the dry scent of ink, wax, old wood, and something else, dusty reverence. Scrolls line the shelves, each tagged with symbols rather than titles. Clay tablets lean together like gossiping elders. And at the center of the room, under the care of 3 rotating scribes, is a stone table holding a strange and beautiful object. A catalog of coins, carved directly into slate. The table, they explain, was once used to teach officials and priests how to recognize legitimate tokens. Each coin type is carved into the surface, a kind of 3-dimensional visual index, with accompanying inscriptions in Gs. Some of the coins are common. The wide stone tokens marked with crosses, the thin copper discs with haloed busts. Others are rare, single-issue commemoratives, odd denominations, and one peculiar piece that seems more ornament than coin. Its surface engraved with floral spirals and a pair of eyes staring in opposite directions. A blessing against deceit, the scribe says. You trace your fingers across the carvings. Each groove is worn smooth. Generations of learners, officials, and perhaps even taxmen have studied these shapes, memorized their weight, their meaning, their proper place. Because this was not just a gallery. It was a curricular archive, a school where coinage wasn't merely catalogued, it was taught. Historians still argue whether this coin archive was ever formalized as a government mint record, or whether it began as a private ledger. Perhaps the project of a zealous scribe who couldn't bear the thought of so many symbols being forgotten. What's certain is that the system worked. Dozens of coins recovered across the region matched the carvings here with eerie precision, same dimensions, same iconography. These weren't casual carvings. They were templates. Aksum, for all its rustic simplicity, had found a way to institutionalize memory. In one corner of the room stands a tall cabinet filled with wood and clay coin molds, each labeled with a scribe's name and the date of its first use. Many are cracked. Some have thumbprints baked into their sides. You're shown one attributed to the reign of King Arma, an early 7th century ruler who oversaw a brief coinage revival during a period of regional instability. His mold bears a distinctive starburst around a cross, and the coin's edge is etched with a prayer. May this pass with peace. The mold was only used for 5 years. Then it was retired and archived here. The scribes pull out a ledger scroll, carefully unrolling it along the floor. It's written in ink made from acacia bark and iron filings. It lists coin weights, dimensions, iconographies, accepted markets, and regional variations. You read. Type 4, copper round. Crowned king, forward facing. Reverse. Cross and vine. Preferred for southern market. Trade conversion. 3-to-1 salt slab. The detail is astonishing. The effort to document not just the coins, but their context, speaks to a civilization that understood economy as more than numbers. It was texture, motion, reliability. You sit with the senior scribe, who's been tending the archive since his youth. He tells you that even when the kingdom's economy faltered, this room stayed open. We copied coins long after they stopped being made, he says. We believed the pattern would return. That a king would rise and say, "Bring me the shapes. Let the money move again." You ask if anyone ever did. He smiles. Not yet. In the afternoon, you're led to an adjoining room, darker, quieter. This one holds the rejects. Coins that never circulated, tokens deemed flawed or unclear. They rest in narrow drawers, each with a scrap of parchment explaining their exclusion. Face unrecognizable. Script reversed. Symbol unclear. You expect a sense of disappointment. But the scribe running this section seems proud. They tell us what mattered, she says. What wasn't allowed to slip. You hold one coin that shows two kings side by side, but one has no face. A dispute, she shrugs. Or a printing error. Or a parable. Even in its decline, the Aksumite Empire had taken the time to curate its memory of value. This wasn't obsessive bookkeeping. It was cultural infrastructure. How meaning was preserved when wealth could no longer be minted. The coin archive became less a record of economy and more a repository of identity. As the sun lowers and you prepare to leave, the scribes gather for evening ritual. Not a prayer exactly, but a quiet recounting of symbols. Each takes a coin from the archive and recites what it was used for, what it meant. Some repeat well-known phrases. Others improvise, giving new life to old forms. One coin, marked only with a single line, is said to represent the king's silence. Another, a blank circle, the hunger between rains. You walk out into the dusk carrying a charcoal rubbing from the carved slate. It's the shape of a coin long out of circulation, never valuable in silver or salt, but still carefully remembered. The coin never bought a thing. But someone carved it, and someone kept it, and now, so do you. The road you take today is one of those slow, meandering types that feels more like a thought than a direction. It loops southward into the foothills, cutting between narrow terraces and winding past streams that murmur things no longer spoken aloud. Here, in the gentler parts of what was once Aksum's outer territory, you find the kind of villages where people still tell time by birdsong and still keep coin boxes that aren't for spending. You're visiting a family known for preserving an old tradition, one that predated coinage and lingered long after it faded. It's called the memory chest, and it's exactly what it sounds like. A wooden or clay box kept near the hearth, filled not with money in the conventional sense, but with tokens of transaction. A smooth stone, a tuft of dyed wool, a broken bead, and, yes, among them, always a coin or two. Not because they were needed, but because they meant something. The matriarch of the household, a woman with laugh lines so deep they could hold raindrops, shows you hers. It's not locked. It never was. Inside, wrapped in a scrap of linen, are 3 stone coins and 1 small copper piece, all worn to near blankness. This one, she says, lifting the copper coin, came from my grandfather. He traded it for a jug of honey, then gave it back to the seller the next week, just to say thank you. You ask what it's worth now. She laughs. A song. A story, maybe a little respect. And this is where Aksum's legacy truly lingers, not in currency, but in custom. The empire may have declined. The trade routes dried up. The mint's gone cold. But the act of marking meaning with an object, of holding a piece of the past in your hand and saying, this stood for something, that never left. You're led to a neighboring hamlet where elders gather monthly for what they call a circle of weight. It's not a formal market, nor a religious ceremony. It's something in between. Each elder brings an item. Sometimes food, sometimes cloth, sometimes a token. They place them on the mat in the center of the circle. One man lays down a worn coin carved with a wheat stalk. This is for remembering my wife, he says softly. A woman adds a flat stone with 3 grooves. This was my brother's, she says. It paid for a mule. We still have the mule. And then they sit in silence, not trading, not haggling, but offering presents. Historians would struggle to categorize this. Is it ritual? Is it economic reenactment? Or is it just community memory at work, shaped around objects that used to hold more concrete value but now serve as vessels of personal truth? You ask one of the younger villagers if the coins still matter to him. Not to buy things, he replies. But to understand things? Yes. He keeps a stone coin in his satchel, passed down from his uncle. It's unmarked, just a circle smoothed by time and palms. When I argue with someone, I hold it, he says. It helps me remember not to say the last word. Further up the trail, in a shaded grove beside a spring, you meet a group of teenagers playing a quiet game. It's a mix of storytelling and guesswork. Each takes a turn placing a coin-shaped object in the center, then telling a tale that fits the coin. One boy presents a disc with a notch. This is from a king who never lost a battle, but forgot how to speak. Another girl shows a split copper coin. This one's for when 2 friends part ways, promising to find each other again. The game ends with laughter, and the coins go back into their pouch, not prized, but respected. In the larger town nearby, you visit a museum curated entirely by local volunteers. It's more of a memory room than an institution. Wooden shelves, hand-painted labels, bundles of reeds tied with string. One exhibit catches your eye. Coins used in apologies. The placard reads, "When words were hard, stones were easier." You learn that in certain communities, rather than offering verbal apologies, people would place a token, a coin or smooth stone, at someone's doorstep. No note, no explanation, just the weight of acknowledgement. Later, if the token disappeared, forgiveness was understood. If it remained, more time was needed. You sit with the curator, who says she's seen hundreds of these coins pass through the room. Some are intricately carved, others plain. One is made of baked clay and has the word, "stay," etched into it in G's. She doesn't know who made it or why, but she keeps it near the entrance, as a kind of greeting. It reminds us, she says, that value isn't about what you get, it's about what you carry. As evening falls, the hills glow gold and pink. You walk down the path from the village, your own satchel a little heavier now with borrowed memories. There's a coin inside, gifted by one of the elders, a stone disc barely wider than your thumb. It bears no symbol, no inscription, just a single, worn groove down the middle, like a line between yesterday and tomorrow. And as the wind shifts again, lifting the scent of eucalyptus and earth, you feel the coin pressing gently against your side. It doesn't buy anything, it doesn't prove anything, but it reminds you, quietly, insistently, that once, long ago, people believed in holding history in their hands. And some still do. There's a place they call the listening field, an empty stretch of terraced earth just outside the ruins of an old watchtower, where the wind rarely stops and the trees seem to lean in, as if trying to overhear stories being whispered by the soil. No one farms here anymore, The land is too thin, the stones too stubborn. But people still come, not to plant, but to remember. They kneel near the wind-worn stones, place tokens in the grass, and wait. Sometimes for silence, sometimes for memory. You've been brought here to witness what's left when a kingdom's coins have passed entirely out of circulation, when even barter has become story, and what remains is only the echo of value. You walk slowly along the field's edge, following a line of flattened rocks that once marked a boundary, between fields, perhaps, or between times. At its center lies a shallow pit, more like a gesture than a hole. Within it, arranged in a circle, are coins, or what used to be coins. Mostly stone, a few copper, a handful reduced to unrecognizable slivers. And all of them, every last one, has been broken deliberately. You sit with an old man who tends this circle. He is not a priest, not a scholar, just a keeper. He has no formal title and claims no sacred knowledge. But he knows each coin. That one, he says, pointing to a fractured disc with 3 carved lines, was split after a promise was broken. He gestures to a chipped token with a jagged edge. This one was never finished. They say its king died before it could be spent. You ask him who brings these coins. He smiles, not at you but at the horizon. Everyone. Eventually. The listening field isn't marked on any map. It isn't mentioned in royal edicts or coin ledgers. But it is remembered, and in the slow hush of its wind-churned silence, you begin to see why. Because this place isn't about money. It's about letting go. Some coins were brought here to be broken. Others arrived already shattered, carried in soft cloths, placed gently on the stone altar at the field's edge. There's no ritual, no fixed chant. Only gestures. A kiss pressed to the coin. A whispered name. A pause. Then the coin is either placed whole or cracked with a nearby stone and added to the circle. Why break them? You ask the keeper this, and he offers the only answer you'll need. So they don't carry weight anymore. Historians would struggle to categorize this. It doesn't fit into any neat theory of coinage or circulation. But maybe it doesn't have to. Because here, coins were never just trade tools. They were vessels. And when what they carried, love, regret, debt, remembrance, had served its time, people brought them here. To return them to the earth. Not as trash, but as closure. You meet a woman who placed a stone coin here decades ago. She's visiting today just to sit. It was my husband's, she says. He carried it when we first married. Said it reminded him to listen before he spoke. You ask what happened to him. She shrugs. Gone now. But the coin's still here. She doesn't want it back. It's not grief she's carrying. It's peace. There's something powerful in this simplicity. A kingdom once ruled by coins now has a field where they are quietly retired, returned not to circulation, but to stillness. A kind of ceremonial composting. You watch as a boy arrives with a cracked copper piece. He doesn't say much, just places the coin among the others and sits in the grass. Later, he tells you he found it while digging in a hillside and didn't want to throw it away. It felt like someone had used it for something important, he says. So I brought it here. You ask the keeper if there's ever been a coin removed from the circle. He nods. Once or twice. People think they've found something valuable. But they always bring it back. You ask why. Because it stops feeling like theirs, he says. The weight shifts. You look again at the circle. It isn't ordered. It isn't neat. But it is held. It's a place where value isn't assigned, it's released. And maybe that's the final act of a truly wise economy. To know when a coin's work is done. As the day wanes, a soft haze rises from the field. Birds drift overhead, lazy and unhurried. You take a seat near the outer stones, where a small basket holds several unplaced coins. They wait, not to be spent, but to be set down. One bears the ghost of a cross. Another, an image of a king long lost to name or date. You don't take one. You don't need to. But you understand why someone might. And more importantly, why they might bring it back. Because this field isn't just where coins go to rest. It's where people do. In a world that so often clings to what things cost, the listening field asks a quieter question. What was it worth? And is it time to let it go? The morning is quiet as breath held between stories. You're standing in the threshold of a school that hasn't taught in years, its blackboards cracked, its benches softened by termites, its windows blank with sky. And yet, on the far wall, faded and faint but unmistakable, is a mural. Not of saints or alphabets or harvests, but of coins, dozens of them, arranged in a ring like a sun. Some marked with crosses, others with crowns, one painted with what looks like a fish. Another bears only a single line, slanted like a falling branch. You wouldn't know their names. No one here does anymore. But the mural remains, and you've come today to understand why the memory of coinage still clings to places like this, long after the coins themselves have stopped clinking. In this final stretch of your journey, you trace the cultural shadow of Aksumite coinage, not the economic system it once powered, but the way it embedded itself into language, rhythm, imagination. Because if the market was its stage, the mind was its echo, and echoes have a way of outlasting walls. You walk through the village square, past a storyteller who holds a worn copper token in her lap, flicking it with her thumb as she speaks. The king gave this to a lion, she says, and the lion never attacked another traveler again. Her listeners, mostly children, nod solemnly. You're not sure if they believe the tale. That's not the point. The coin is no longer a tool of purchase. It's a key to wonder. In a weaving house, you find old designs that still incorporate coin-like motifs, circular medallions surrounded by symbolic lines. One pattern, known locally as the King's Whisper, mimics the layout of ancient Aksumite currency. A central figure, now abstracted into a swirl, surrounded by repeating shapes that recall crosslays or olive branches. The weaver tells you she never knew the original meaning, but the shapes felt important, she says, like someone once trusted them. You speak with a group of musicians who perform a lullaby said to date back to the last kings of Aksum. The song has no lyrics, only low hums and percussive clinks made with two smooth stones struck together. Tokens passed down not for their value, but for their sound. They were coins, the drummer says, now they're rhythm. Elsewhere, in a marriage blessing, a young couple places a flat stone coin between their palms before exchanging vows, not to symbolize wealth, but balance. This coin has two sides, the officiant says. Like every promise, face each other with both. You start to notice how coins have migrated from the physical world to the metaphorical. In Proverbs, a soft word is worth 2 coins. In scoldings, you've thrown away your king's coin, now walk like a common stone. In greetings, what value do you carry today? The phrases linger like worn pathways through language, where the meaning of coinage has transcended metal and market and become something quieter, more human. Historians might call this cultural residue, traces of a system embedded in practice. But sitting with a group of elders under a fig tree, sipping a sour herbal brew as the wind turns the leaves silver, it feels like something deeper. They speak not of coins but of values, trust, honor, patience, clarity. One elder taps his walking stick on the ground. The coin was never the important thing, he says. It was how you used it. Who saw you use it? What you carried when you didn't need to. You're led to a small shrine at the edge of a clearing, where a young girl is placing a circle of pebbles around a candle. She tells you it's for her grandfather. That he once told her a coin could hold a person's good deeds. That if you whispered something kind over it, it would remember. She doesn't know where he got the idea. Maybe he didn't either. But she believes it, and so do you. By now, you've lost count of how many coins you've seen, not in pouches or markets, but tucked into sashes, pressed into doorways, carved into memory. Most don't work anymore. That's not the point. They're not money. They're mirrors. Holding them up, people remember who they were when the coins still meant something. When a face on a disc spoke not just of a king, but of a moment, a promise, a shared breath in the great, bustling hum of an empire. And what's astonishing is that Aksum never needed to enforce this memory. No edicts, no state museums, no gold-plated manifestos, just habits, repetition, quiet keeping, the way someone teaches their grandchild how to wrap a coin in cloth, or the melody of a tune that once accompanied a trade route caravan. Coins passed from generation to generation, not as wealth, but as thread. You return to the mural in the abandoned schoolhouse just before dusk. The light slants low across the stone floor. You sit on the dusty bench beneath it, tracing the air around the painted circles. The colors are fading, the outlines soft. But the intention is there. A teacher once painted this to help students recognize the signs of value. And now, long after the classroom emptied, those signs remain, not as a lesson in math or barter, but as a memory map of a kingdom that minted meaning. And let that meaning outlive its coins. The journey ends where all journeys worth remembering do. Not with a grand finale, but with a return. You're back at the foot of Aksum's towering stelae, their granite faces catching the last warmth of the setting sun, casting long shadows over earth that still hums with old weight. You sit beneath one of the lesser stones, not the tallest or the best preserved, but the one with a tiny carved square near its base. No one knows what it meant. Maybe a mason's mark, maybe something forgotten, but it feels like a final coin, flat, overlooked, still holding its shape. By now, you've touched every stage of Aksumite coinage. Its birth in borrowed alphabets, its heyday in markets and temples, its twilight in baskets and bundles and breathless memory. You've watched a king's face fade into game pieces. You've seen copper used to hold candles straight. You've heard lullabies tapped out on stone tokens. You've stood in a field where coins were broken not with scorn, but with care. And through it all, something unexpected has emerged. Not a history of money, but a history of intimacy, measured in weight and gesture and the quiet conviction that even the humblest object can carry something sacred. The final story belongs to a boy, a shepherd, barely 10, who wanders into view as you sit beneath the stela. He has a pouch tied to his sash, clinking faintly. You ask what's inside. Old coins, he says, tugging the drawstring open. Inside, 3 stone tokens and a bit of iron shaped into a heart. I found them near the river. My grandfather says they're for remembering. You ask if he plans to spend them. He looks puzzled. You don't spend these, he says. You keep them for when you forget who you are. You smile. He's not wrong. Because in Aksum, long after the mint fires cooled and the ships stopped docking, coins never stopped working. They just changed jobs. From tokens of trade to tokens of time. From declarations of rule to whispers of connection. In their best moments, they became everything money wants to be but rarely is: gentle, lasting, true. And as the stars begin to prick through the sky above, and the wind curls softly around the old stone like breath, you reach into your own pocket. The coin's still there, the one with no name, no date, just a curve worn smooth by thought and walking. You press it into the soil at the stela's base. Not because it belongs to history, but because, now, it is. Wind down. Let it all soften now. Let the coins grow warm in your memory and drift, slowly, into the gentle folds of sleep. The clang of trade has faded. The hum of market chatter has stilled. You're no longer walking through the dusty alleys of Aksum or tracing symbols with a curious thumb. You're resting beside a quiet stream, where smooth stones line the bank, and none of them need to mean anything. They simply are. The faces of kings have turned to clouds in your thoughts, their crowns dissolving into shadowy rings of half-forgotten dreams. Crosses, crescents, sheaves of wheat, they all begin to blur, not into nothingness, but into comfort. Because even the sharpest images, when held long enough, become familiar. Rounded, worn, like the best-loved coin in a grandfather's coat pocket. Breathe slowly. The coins you've followed were never just currency, they were carriers. Of faith, of time, of love passed hand to hand. Now, those hands have let go, and so can you. No more ledgers, no more inscriptions, no more weight to measure. Just the feeling of something cool and solid slipping gently from your palm to the earth. Nothing to prove, nothing to claim, only presence. So close your eyes, if they're not already. The starlight is out now, spreading quiet silver across a landscape that no longer demands your attention. You've arrived, not at a temple or a treasury, but at stillness, at the resting place of all journeys. Sleep well now. The empire remembers you, and in the hush of its stones, it leaves you with one final whisper. You were here. You held something once, and it held you back.